Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, it wasn't easy for Melinda Stratton to leave 6-month-old baby Keegan in her mother's charge, but she did have to return to work, even though her heart definitely belonged at home with her baby. Sometimes in life you did what you had to do to put bread on the table and to provide a living for yourself and your family. Melinda was inspirationally independent and resourceful. She was also extremely ambitious. But alas, the once flourishing prestigious hair and nail salon that she ran very efficiently in town appeared to be falling apart at the seams while she had been away on maternity leave. It would seem in the grand scheme of things, no one ran a place as efficiently as she did. Kirsty Rawlings, who had been her long-time personal assistant, had taken over the salon on a temporary basis during her leave of absence, and it appeared that she had been screwing up the bookings and messing customers around. By all accounts, her incompetence, along with her absent-mindedness, had turned customers away. So during Melinda's maternity leave, it appeared that she was sadly losing business to their competitor down the street, which had been unheard of before. Ostensibly, Melinda knew that if Kirsty remained in charge of running the hair and nail salon, she wouldn't have a business left, as it was hanging on to dear life by a very fragile thin silvery thread, so extending her maternity leave for a while longer was not an option. She had decided to return to work sooner than she would have liked, which seemed like the only appropriate thing to do in the circumstances in order to salvage the salon from slipping into further decline. Some of the stylists at the salon had contacted Melinda urgently while she was at home with her mother Nancy. They had begged her to return to work as quickly as possible, claiming that Kirsty Rawlings was turning the business upside down on its head and would disappear for hours on end for no rhyme or reason. One of the girls in the salon suggested that Kirsty was actually seeing a young man during work hours, and this news went down with Melinda like a lead balloon, for it only served to highlight the fact that her salon, like the Titanic, would soon hit an iceberg, and then her business would likely sink. And she had invested so much in her business over the years, she couldn't allow this to happen. Her business needed immediate rescuing before it was too late. Melinda Stratton was a single mother. She'd got pregnant by a random stranger she met in a bar when she'd had far too much to drink. She had gone off with a stranger. His name had been Scott, but as to what his surname was, or where he was from, she had no clue. But she did detect he had a New York accent. She was not proud of what she'd done, and rather ashamed to admit that she barely remembered the stranger. She'd never been the type of woman to hook up with random strangers like this before, but this one night of passion had led to so much more than she'd ever bargained for. Melinda was mortified to discover she was pregnant by a stranger who was all but a vague blot on her memory, whom, if the truth be told, she would be unable to single out in a police lineup, as her memory of him was that obscure. She had always wanted to become a mother, So no matter how inconvenient and inappropriate the timing was, she certainly wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. So when she realized she was with child, she reasoned that this was the quintessential opportunity for her to embrace the entire process. After all, you couldn't put a price on family, as far as Melinda was concerned, for nothing, in her opinion, was more precious. So therefore she had decided to take the bull by the horns, for she was by nature a very decisive person, who didn't hesitate for a second when it came to making long-term plans of any sort. She had sagaciously decided to rent out her apartment in town and move into her family home with her mother Nancy, in what was a rustic-looking house with oodles of charm, located in a rural area in the Pacific Northwest. The house itself rather resembled one of those prepossessing properties you might find in Tuscany, as there was Italianite influences to the architecture, which made you think of warm summer days. Olive oil drizzled over tomato and mozzarella salad, limoncello, frothy Italian coffee, and the best gelato you've ever tasted, from strawberry to tiramisu and pistachio. The house was originally built by an Italian builder. Highly esteemed he was in the 1970s. His name was Mario Montefiore, so the house embodied the authentic Italian look. Many of the Stratton visitors claimed that when they visited the house, they felt as if they had taken a short trip down memory lane back to Italy, as the Italian influences of the property, with its open courtyards, arches, extended balconies and porches, along with its sandstone steps and grand columns, was breathtaking to say the very least. Then there were terracotta pots filled with a tumble of hanging geraniums. The kitchen garden was filled with herbs of every kind, vegetables and tomatoes, and the rustic kitchen itself embodied the best aspects of Italian life, so the place was nothing short of something you would find in an upmarket, very glossy, country and home living magazine. For Melinda Stratton, moving into the family home to be with her mother meant that her mother could take charge of baby Keegan for her while she was away at work, managing the salon, and overseeing all the affairs her business naturally demanded. It had seemed like a great idea for both mother and daughter to remain together, as Melinda would never have trusted any random babysitter to look after little Keegan. She had heard horrendous stories over the years of childminders abusing their trust, being irresponsible with the children in their charge, so she really had big issues with trusting a perfect stranger with her baby, even if they had the best references in the world and came highly qualified. By all accounts, the Stratton family house was an idyllic place to raise a young child who could run around the property to his heart's content and be surrounded by the prepossessing splendors of the natural world. Nancy Stratton was a grieving widow who had recently lost her husband to a very sudden, inexplicable death that had left her feeling frazzled, rather dazed and almost shaken up from the tragedy of her husband's very sudden passing, for nobody had anticipated it. Nancy had woken up one morning to find her beloved husband lying beside her fast asleep, which was a surprise because he usually got up before she did. His eyes appeared to be tightly shut, his mouth hanging half open. He had been so ice-cold to the touch it had taken her aback. He looked so peaceful. She had tried to vigorously shake him as hard as she could to rouse him from his deep slumber, but he had failed to respond. It had been a horror to discover he was actually deceased. Even the coroner could find no plausible explanation for his untimely demise, which had been exceedingly disquieting. The coroner had reassured Nancy that this sometimes happened, and that her husband dying in his sleep had been an enviable kind of death, as no suffering was involved. Yet for Nancy, without her husband around to share in the bounty of the great riches that life had to offer, and to enjoy their golden years together in their magnificent home, made her feel as if she'd been cruelly cheated. It was as if her husband's premature, very sudden passing had caused her entire world to collapse and crumble in her hands, rather like a chocolate chip cookie. She felt so hopelessly lost without Kenneth, as he'd been the light of her life. The couple had been incredibly close, so much so that they could practically finish each other's sentences. Nancy felt as if she'd been thrown into the deep end of her life and was struggling to stay afloat, because without Kenneth around, one thing was for certain: things would never ever be the same again. It really distressed her that she had never had a chance to even say goodbye to her husband, for she had never once, not even for a moment, anticipated his early death. "Mum, wherever Dad is, I'm sure he's absolutely fine," Belinda had assured her grief-stricken mother. "He's at peace now. The coroner told you he didn't suffer. He just went to bed and never woke up. And you've got to admit it, it's the best way to go. I mean, if I was given a choice on how I wished to die, dying in my sleep very peacefully would be the way I wanted to go. At least Dad didn't have a ravaging cancer, and he wasn't killed in a tragic car wreck. He simply went to bed one night and never woke up in the morning." "Maybe, love, what you say is absolutely true. Your father did indeed die peacefully in his sleep, and I'm grateful for that. And it is probably the best way to go. But it doesn't erase the fact that I was totally unprepared for my life to be unscrupulously torn apart like this, so cruelly. What am I going to do? Rattling around in this very large house all on my own. Me and your father, we had big dreams, you know. We looked forward to enjoying this place during our retirement years. But never for a second did I ever envisage being alone. To all intents and purposes, without Kenneth around, I'm going to feel as if my life has absolutely no purpose. I'm going to be awfully lonely hanging around this large house on my own. But if the truth be told, I haven't got the energy or even the will to sell this place up, to buy something small and poky in return that will likely make me feel utterly miserable. My whole life was in this house, you know. All my memories were made here. We built the most perfect house of our dreams for us to thoroughly enjoy, with that Italian architect Mario Montefiore, whatever his name is. He brought our dream to life for us, because when me and your father visited Tuscany on our honeymoon, we fell in love with the place. We absolutely did, and the architecture was absolutely breathtaking. We knew we couldn't live there, so we decided to bring a little bit of Tuscany back to the Pacific Northwest, which is exactly what we did. We were so privileged to live in a house like this, and I still feel very privileged, even without your father around. If I put this house on the market, part of me will believe I'm abandoning Kenneth. I'm so attached to this place, I really am. I've lived here for over 30 years. The idea of selling up makes my heart want to break. Furthermore, I'd like to leave the house to you in my will one day, after I'm gone, so that you can get to enjoy the place too. Sorry, I'm getting so dreadfully sentimental, aren't I? You have a right to be sentimental, Mum. This house is incredibly special. I mean, it looks as if it's cut out of an Italian magazine and plonked into the American countryside. We have so many beautiful memories living here as a family when Dad was alive. I'm sure he'd hate you to sell this place. He was attached to it as much as we both are." At this point, tears trickled down Nancy Stratton's cheeks, which she self-consciously brushed away. "Don't mind me, love. I'm just feeling so dreadfully sorry for myself. I need to get my act together, don't I? Grit my teeth and get on with it. That's what your father would expect me to do. He had no sympathy for people who wallowed in their own self-pity, like I'm doing now." Belinda cradled her mother lovingly in her arms to comfort her. She hated her mother looking so desperately vulnerable in that moment. She almost felt as if their roles had changed, and now she was the one mothering her mother, a woman who was stoic and courageous by nature, who barely ever showed any emotion. But after her husband's Kenneth's untimely demise, the cracks of her mother's burgeoning insecurities were now beginning to show. "Mum, don't be ridiculous," Belinda had said reassuringly. "The last thing you want to do is sell this house. It's so full of your precious memories, our memories. And there's no way I will let you abandon this place, no way on God's earth. Do you understand? You have put so much of your love in this place, and selling it to someone who doesn't appreciate it the way you and I do would be an utter travesty." "I might be left with no choice, darling, but to sell," Nancy had said sorrowfully. "Melinda, this house is very big, I hope you realize, for one person. I suppose I could take on a boarder or two. but that's not really my cup of tea. I mean, there's issues with those kind of arrangements, are there not? I may get someone rather unfortunate moving in with me that I don't particularly like. There might be a conflict in personality or something. And when I try to evict them, they may refuse to leave. You do hear horrifying stories like that, don't you? And being so recently widowed like I am, I need all that extra stress in my life like a hole in the head. If I want to stay here, it might be my only option to consider, though. I've got 5 very generous-sized rooms in this house with bathrooms as well. So taking on 1 or 2 boarders is a distinct possibility I might have to consider. It could either go extremely well and be the best decision I've ever made, where I develop some really good friendships with people, but there's a possibility that it could be a complete and utter disaster, and I fear the latter very much. Mum, don't you get it? The good news is you don't have to go down that route. I think you're getting a boarder, especially with your being so vulnerable after Dad's death, would be absolutely insane. And like you say, you don't know who you're going to get. The way I see it, we both need each other. I'm going to have a baby very soon. So how about I move in with you permanently? The 3 of us can rattle around this big house together. While I'm at work, you can look after your grandchild. I'll need someone to take care of my baby for me. Hopefully it'll be a good distraction for you, so you don't have to dwell so much on Dad's death. And that in itself is the best way to get back on the horse after a fall, don't you think? I suspect being suitably distracted is healing in itself, as when you're focused on doing other things and you keep yourself busy, it stops you from dwelling on the past. It makes you focus in the present. I rather suspect we both feel a little like the pawns on a chessboard right now, that have been thrown around the place, and now we have to get back on that board and continue with the game of life. It's not easy, I know, Mum, but I think we can both help each other out, both emotionally and physically. Probably better than any counsellor could. Me personally, I don't even have any faith in counsellors. You would do that for your old mother? I don't know what to say, Melinda. Move in with me. You're a young woman, aren't you? With your whole life ahead of you. You have a spectacular, trendy apartment in town, which is the envy of so many young people your age. Why on earth would you want to saddle yourself with the likes of me? I really don't need your pity, dear, but it's a very thoughtful thing for you to consider. Melinda put her hand on her hip defiantly, rolling her eyes in exasperation. Mum, do we have to go there? For a start, you're not owed. And if you must know, I don't pity you at all. I'm incredibly impressed by the way you've been holding it together after Dad's premature death. I'm sure he is very proud of your courage. It hasn't been easy for the both of us losing him like this. Life isn't fair, Mum, but sometimes we have to muddy along, whatever the circumstances may be, to make the most out of a bad situation. Let's not kid, we are both in a pickle. I'm soon to be a single mother, with a baby boy on my hands to take care of, and a business to run, and you're alone in a big house that you simply don't want to sell, that has understandably become too big for you at the moment, especially after Dad's death. When Dad was alive, his soulful presence was so large, it filled the whole house, did it not? Oh, that it did, her mother agreed. I'm moving in with you, Mum, because I want to. And I will thoroughly enjoy your company because I always do. You're not just my mother, Mum. You're my very best friend in the whole world. It'll be like old times. It will be fun. Besides, I've got my own agenda here. I need your help with raising my baby boy. And I certainly don't want to hire a nanny. I need someone I can rely on and trust to watch over my baby while I'm at work. You know as well as I do, when you pay a random stranger to look after your kid, even if they're qualified in what they do, there are no guarantees that you're hiring someone you can actually trust, even if they have great references, because you have no clue how trustworthy they're going to be. And as far as having a boarder, well, you don't know what you're getting there either. In my case, I would probably go to work feeling sick to my stomach every day if somebody else was looking after my baby, wondering if I could trust that person, who is overseeing my little boy. But with you at the helm of this domestic ship, I wouldn't have to worry about a single thing, would I? And that would be a huge, huge weight off my mind. You have no idea. It would be a win-win situation, don't you think? And besides, I'd pay you handsomely for overseeing your grandbaby. So what do you think about that?" Nancy Stratton looked somewhat bemused, as if her daughter's words were sinking in very slowly, and she was trying to make sense of them. "But you love your apartment in town, darling. You've made it up so beautifully, haven't you? Do you really want to move in with your old mother? I'm really not sure it's a good idea. I don't want to become a stumbling block in your life. And be warned, that's a very big possibility. Mum, quit this old stuff, will you? You're not old, and get that into your thick head. For your information, I do want to move in with you. It's a perfect arrangement, and it has nothing to do with pity, believe me. How many times do I have to tell you this? My apartment in town I will put up for rent. But it's nothing on this house, as glamorous as it may be. I don't think my poky apartment is an ideal place to raise a child. For a start, the outdoor space at the apartment block is severely restricted. It's limited to a shared courtyard among the residents. I have seen little kids that live in the apartments running up the stairwells and playing around the passages. There's stairs everywhere, and recently one child fell down a flight of stairs and hit her head badly. She was concussed for a while. I don't want that happening to my child. Your grandson will be able to ride a bike around here to his heart's content, and he'll be safe. He can get his hands as dirty as he wants and explore nature. He could never get that at my apartment, where you're not even allowed to keep an animal. And what little boy doesn't want to have a pet of some kind? This is a much better place to raise a child, and I think living together will be fun. You get lonely, Mum. I get lonely, believe it or not. We enjoy each other's company. We can make this work. I really believe we can. What do you think? Oh, by the way, Mum, no isn't an option. I'm sorry, but I'm a tough negotiator." "You're not kidding, Melinda. You are a tough negotiator. You never take no for an answer, do you? But what you're suggesting, although it makes perfect sense, I still worry about becoming a stumbling block for you. Sooner or later you're going to meet someone, or at least start dating. And I'm quite sure you don't want to be a single mother all your life. And you're going to want to bring a fabulous gentleman home to the house. But knowing you're shacked up with your mother, living in your old childhood home, that's going to be a turn-off for many men, I'm most sure. If this lovely gentleman thinks you live with your mother, he may see it as a potential red flag. Think you're a mummy's girl or something and run the hell away. You don't want your old mother destroying your love life for you, do you? It's the last thing I'd want for you." "Mum, I'm not in a place in my life where I actually want to date. I'm a single mother with my own business to run. I have a heap of responsibilities. Dating is the last thing I want to think about. And if I did start to date, and the guy got scared off because I was living with my mother, well, what does that say about him? If he likes me enough, he'll understand the dynamics of my life and fit in accordingly. Maybe if I got really serious about him, he'd move in with us, and instead of there being 3 of us in this house, there would be 4. We could turn the upper floor into our living quarters. It could potentially work long term. It's funny, this is an Italian-looking house, and in Italy it's perfectly normal for 3 generations of a single family to live together under one roof. And in my opinion, it makes perfect sense. I have an Italian friend of mine who was raised in Italy with her parents, with her grandparents and even great-grandparents, all living under one roof, and it really worked for the family. Imagine that, Mum. She said her grandmother was the greatest inspiration in her life, and over there, the older generation is always held in great regard, for their wisdom is so invaluable. So don't underestimate your important role in your grandson's life, Mum. You're an invaluable asset, let me tell you." "I suppose that is true enough," said Nancy. "Grandmothers do have their role, and I think they do have some wisdom to bring to the table. Come to think of it, I don't want to be climbing steps as I get older. And that staircase is very steep. So yes, long term, the upper floor could be used for the 4 of you. if a man was brought into the equation, so to speak. If the truth be told, darling, I couldn't think of anything I'd love more than you moving in with me, and all of us living together under one roof. I would love to look after my grandchild while you're away at work. We could set up a nursery for the baby. It'll be just what I need to get my mind off your late father. And it'll be so good not having to rattle around this large house all on my own. And even better not to take any boarders in. If my grandchild proves to be anything like you were as a baby, well, I'll be kept on my toes for sure." "Well, there you go, Mum. We've got it all sorted out," said Melinda enthusiastically. And that had been that. Melinda had rented out her apartment in town as she had promised she would. And after her baby Keegan was born, she had taken off 6 months' maternity leave. But now she had to go back to work before the salon folded under Kirsty Rawlings' charge. It had been so stressful, having Kirsty phoning up every other day, asking Melinda how to solve yet another crisis in the salon. It seemed Kirsty appeared permanently distracted, and Melinda suspected the rumours were true, and that Kirsty was preoccupied with a young, handsome stranger in her life, so the last thing on her mind was managing the salon. Melinda was extremely close to her mother Nancy, and much as she thoroughly enjoyed her independence, it really was a godsend having her mother around to help with little Keegan, who was growing up to be an absolutely adorable baby. But unfortunately, from the moment he had been born, he had suffered from severe colic, and was failing to thrive in the way that he should have done, which was a great worry and concern for Melinda. The doctor was also concerned about her baby's low weight. So Keegan was proving to be rather sickly, and sometimes at night Melinda had been up at all hours attending to a screaming baby that refused to be comforted. Despite all the ailing problems Melinda was having with little Keegan on the health front, she thoroughly enjoyed her mother's company. Nancy Stratton had a fabulous sense of humour, but being back at home in this gorgeous country setting, surrounded by tall, lofty trees and beautiful country trails, was so much better than being cooped up in the apartment in town. It certainly meant for Melinda that she could get up early and go for that morning jog that she always wanted to go for, to help her get back into shape, for she was carrying 20 pounds of extra body weight that she felt she needed to lose, as having a baby had robbed her of her former trim waistline. But that was a very small price to pay when you had a baby like Keegan to watch over, even though he was rather sickly at the moment. The first day, leaving the house to return to the salon, had not been easy for Melinda. It had been an emotional tug-of-war, kissing little Keegan and making her way to the car, when all she wanted to do was to run straight back into the house and take care of her child. "Bye, Mum. I pumped some breast milk for you. It's in the refrigerator. Remember to bring it up to the right temperature and always test it. Good luck with looking after little Keegan. I'll see you later." Nancy Stratton stood in the doorway, cradling little Keegan in her arms. He was not a happy baby at present, due to his ailing health. Nancy was crazy about her grandson and adored his presence around the house. It had made the pain of losing Kenneth so much more bearable. "Don't worry about a thing, my darling. I've got it all sorted out. Everything's under control. Keegan is going to be fine. I think you're the one that's going to need the luck, as Kirsty Rawlings has been giving you the runaround for months, and I'm extremely worried about what things are going to be like for you when you get back on board your ship again." "Don't tell me about it, Mum. I'm dreading getting back to work, and I'm going to miss the both of you like crazy." When Nancy arrived at the salon in town, she was mortified to see how badly Kirsty Rawlings had been running the place, and she was having to address a sea of complaints left by customers who were all unsatisfied, who believed that they had not received the kind of exemplary service they received when Melinda was around. Melinda had made a plethora of phone calls to offer customers a 30% discount on their next salon visit. "Kirsty, what has been going on while I've been away? I trusted you to take care of things around here," she had said to her assistant, trying very hard to hide the disappointment she felt towards the woman. "I did my best, Melinda, but it wasn't easy. The customers were so demanding." "The customers are not demanding, Kirsty. All they want is a decent service. Is that too much to ask? But now I'm back, I'm going to take charge of things from here on, so you can relax in that regard. Frankly, I'm quite shocked by some of the reports I'm getting, Kirsty, about the salon not being up to standard in cleanliness, people feeling their treatments were rushed. People come to the salon, Kirsty, to feel pampered. They expect to leave feeling like $1 million. Instead, they leave bitterly disappointed by the service we offer. One lady said her hair looked like her kid had cut it because you hired a very inexperienced stylist to come to the salon when we were short of staff. And then there was another woman who claimed that her hair had been dyed the wrong colour. Some said you never offered them coffee or gave them a magazine to read while they were waiting for their hair to set. What's wrong with you, Kirsty? When people are paying big money for their hair or nails, they want to be pampered. What about that don't you understand? Kirsty shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly. You don't know how hard it is to manage this place while you were away, Melinda. All the customers gave me grief. They kept complaining about this and that. I think they were upset because you weren't around. Look, Kirsty, they wanted to be pampered. That's why they come here. You robbed them of that privilege. You need to attend to the details, offer them coffee, check that everything that they request has been fulfilled. If you don't, we're going to have a lot of unhappy customers on our hands. Kirsty gritted her teeth together. I'm not you, Melinda. I don't have your abilities, so don't give me a hard time about this. I did my best while you were away. Isn't that enough? I beg to differ, Kirsty. If you'd done your best, you would have diligently attended to our customers' needs. But you failed them, and in doing so you failed me. I understood you took extensive tea breaks for yourself while customers were waiting for you to attend to them in the reception area. How could you possibly do that? If we have to miss out on tea breaks and lunch, we do it. All of us agree on this. Because a customer always comes first. That's what we do in the salon. So what? You're going to sack me after everything I've done for you, is that it? Said Kirsty, looking as cantankerous as a rhino that had been poked with a stick. I'm entitled to a tea break, and if a customer has to wait, they have to wait. What's the big deal about that? It is a big deal. Don't you get it, Kirsty? You didn't behave like this when I was around. I've spoken to the other stylists in the salon, and they said half the time you weren't in the salon. You'd disappear and not be seen for ages. You also recruited someone who had no experience behind them whatsoever. And that person caused a great deal of problems in the salon. One of the stylists saw you in a gentleman's car getting very cosy with him. What do you have to say for yourself? Perhaps you were so distracted by this young gentleman, you weren't able to focus on your work. That's what I think happened. They're lying to you, Melinda, and you believe their lies. I didn't do that. There isn't a gentleman. There's no reason why the other stylists I employ would make up stories about this. They say they saw you. And if you carry on like this, well, it's very bad, Kirsty. You've got a bad attitude. I'll have to sack you if you behave like this. You need to get your act together, do you understand? And think of the customer before yourself. Even if it means working through lunch and tea. As a hairdresser, we have to make compromises. We all know that. It goes with the territory of our job. Just like if you run a hotel and have to be open on holidays. That's how things work around here. Irene, who's been here for a long time, was telling me that she had to leave a customer with hair dye on her hair over the extended recommended period of time. Why? Because you wanted her to manage the reception area. While you went out, you said you'd be 2 minutes, but you were ages. So when Irene removed the dye from her customer, it came out darker than intended, and her hair was very dry. The customer was naturally upset and refused to pay. And none of this was Irene's fault, it was your fault. That customer said she'd never come back again to our salon, so we've lost her for good. I've had numerous complaints from girls about you sauntering off and not managing the reception area when clients arrive. Do you realize how incredibly unprofessional that looks? You were supposed to greet the client, organize the appointment book, but often you were nowhere to be found. You also failed to get Angie to sweep up customers' hair, because you got her to wash your car instead and pick up your dry cleaning, as if she was your personal slave. She's not employed to do your jobs. She's hired to do work at the salon, like sweep the floors. It meant when new customers came for their appointment, they were already sitting in somebody else's clipped hair. That's not acceptable. I don't need to stand here listening to you tear me apart, Melinda. For 6 months I've looked after this place, and what thanks do I get? You were at home nursing your baby. You came back to work, and now you lay it on thick with me, when I can't help it if I need a break. It's not my fault if Angie didn't do her job properly. All right, I admit I asked her to do a few things for me, but it's no big deal. Oh, it's no big deal. Is that your new mantra? It is a big deal. When Angie doesn't do her job, you're the one that needs to tell her what needs to be done around the salon. You failed to supervise the staff adequately, and there as a result have been hundreds of complaints. I expected so much more from you, Kirsty. You promised me you could handle things on your own while I took maternity leave. I trusted in you, but you let me down big time. And I'm not going to lie, I'm bitterly disappointed about this. Some of the stylists were warning me that things around here were bad, but I never expected to return to such chaos. You have exceeded my worst fears. If that's what you think, then you can stuff your stupid job. I don't want it anyway. I hate working for you. And I'm not going to stand here and be belittled like this after everything I've done. Kirsty furiously thundered out of the salon, with her purse in hand. I want nothing more to do with this place or any of you, and I hope you run it into the ground, I really do. Everyone in the salon was suitably silent as Kirsty Rawlings marched out, the glass doors closing behind her. She left her anger filtering in the air like an odious bad smell. It was almost as if she expected Melinda to run after her and apologize, but if she hoped that would be the case, she was in for a rude awakening. All the stylists began to clap and cheer. Everyone was glad to see the back of Kirsty Rawlings, who had made them sweat with discomfort, for she had been managing a sinking ship. So everyone was relieved to have Melinda back on board, to steer the business away from choppy waters. Melinda was clandestinely extremely glad to see her go, for she would have found it exceedingly difficult giving Kirsty Rawlings her calling cards. She soon learnt from all the other stylists what a liability Kirsty had been, and how profoundly relieved they were to finally see the back of her. Melinda knew she had 101 things that needed to get done in order to bring the place back into shape, and it wasn't going to be easy by any manner of means. The salon was in complete disarray, and so many things needed sorting out, from the towels to the stock of shampoos and accessories they sold to their customers. The shelves had been cleaned out, and Kirsty had failed to order more replacements. The customers that had arrived at the salon this morning were so pleased to see Melinda in the driving seat again, greeting them with her warm, friendly smile, and making them feel pampered and special. Oh, goodness gracious, I'm so glad you're back, Melinda. This place has not been the same without you, she kept hearing over and over again from her clientele, all whom had rather unfortunate stories about their treatment in Kirsty's hands. So she realized to her horror that Kirsty had been more than a little inadequate in her handling of the salon. I'm here now, Melinda reassured her clientele. I'm sorry that Kirsty made you feel so unwelcome, but you'll never be subjected to such abysmal treatment again. I can promise you of that. For Melinda it was horrible to feel that while she'd been away, her salon had almost collapsed, as everyone knew that to have a good business, you needed reliable staff to hold the reins of things together while you were away, and Kirsty had done an appallingly lousy job in overseeing the management of the salon, so handing over the responsibility to her had been a catastrophic mistake, a mistake that Melinda could never afford to make again. Indeed, she had been rushed off her feet all morning, busy as anything, sorting out Kirsty's messes, that not only did she not have time for a coffee or a sandwich at lunchtime, but she hadn't even given little Keegan at home a passing thought, for she was so preoccupied getting things into shape again. Back at home it was a seemingly routine day for Melinda's mother, Nancy, but a special day at that, for she was enjoying the responsibility of taking charge over her precious grandson, Keegan. She worried that her grandson's poor health, with all the issues he was having with colic, would give her some tempestuous challenges, as looking after a colicky baby is no walk in the park. Keegan, when he became upset, cried very badly, and indeed he was so loud he'd have lightly raised the sleeping dead. Thankfully he hadn't given her too many issues that morning, but Nancy was somewhat surprised that Melinda hadn't been calling her 100 times a day, asking her how little Keegan was doing. But that was a good thing. It meant her daughter must be settling down at work, managing the affairs of her salon, and not brooding over her baby boy. Nancy had worried profusely about Melinda's return to work, for she knew her daughter was extremely attached to little Keegan, and had really looked very upset about abandoning him to go to work, especially since Keegan suffered from colic and couldn't stop crying for hours on end. He was failing to thrive and was significantly underweight. Nancy knew it was likely that her daughter was feeling like every mother feels about leaving their baby in someone else's charge, even if it is their grandmother. Especially a baby going through some health challenges, like Keegan was at the time. It was a magnificent day. The golden sun shone brightly outside. It was early spring, when the world invited you to spend some quality time out of doors. So Nancy thought, why not embrace the occasion, especially with little Keegan being so sickly at the moment. Some indirect sunshine and fresh air might do him the world of good. At the time, Nancy was knitting her grandson a little woolly jacket, and so she decided to place little Keegan in the portable cot, which she strategically placed on the porch. She decided to sit back comfortably on one of the cushioned Adirondack chairs while she began to knit. Little Keegan was thankfully fast asleep, but likely he'd cry like mad when he became hungry, and when he did, Nancy would know all about it, as Keegan could wail the house down for hours on end when he wanted to feed, and sometimes you didn't know what he was crying about, but that was colic for you. It was a mysterious illness. Nancy was sure she knew the sounds that Keegan made when he wanted his nappy changing, and when he wanted to feed, so she believed she was in tune with her grandson's biorhythm, so to speak. Nancy was tuned into a radio station that she regularly enjoyed listening to, where the host was talking about how to make the perfect cheesecake. People began phoning into the station to explain the things that had gone badly wrong while making theirs. Nancy was a keen cook, so she was interested in gaining as many tips as possible to improve her cooking skills, so her ears were attentive to any advice that might potentially serve her well. Nancy was enjoying the feel of the warm sunshine on her skin, as well as the beguiling views that overlooked the spacious backyard that was heavily fringed by burgeoning woodgroves of majestic but tall, lofty trees. What a lovely afternoon it was, she thought. But as she looked towards the groves of trees, she couldn't shake off the ominous feeling that someone was watching her. She wondered if perhaps she was losing her mind. It was an uncomfortable sense of foreboding that overcame her, but she told herself she was being silly, overreacting perhaps. The radio continued with its long monologue, an in-depth discussion about how to make the perfect cheesecake. Who doesn't love the perfect cheesecake? I'm sure all you listeners do. Me personally, I love cheesecake, said the host. And these days there are so many favourites out there. From pecan nut to chocolate truffle, lemon meringue, strawberry, the list goes on. The main thing you need to focus on for a perfect cheesecake is temperature. Every time it's about temperature. You want an even temperature in your oven, and you don't want it to be too hot. The best way for an even temperature is to cook your cheesecake in a bain-marie. Now, the word bain-marie is another word for water bath. You need to put your cheesecake in a pan of water and cover it with thick foil to ensure that no water from the water bath seeps into the tin. When the cheesecake is finally set and firm to the touch, with a little wobble in the middle, turn off the oven and leave it to set for an hour or so before removing it from the oven, where you can let it cool down for another hour, after which you refrigerate for about 24 hours before eating. Nancy began to make some mental notes about the secrets to making a very good cheesecake, but suddenly she began to feel so exhausted. It was as if she was suddenly overcome with a tiredness she couldn't fight. One eyelid began to droop, followed by the other. Her fingers loosened and relaxed, so that her knitting, the ball of wool along with the knitting needles, fell on the floor and went flying towards Genevieve the cat, who happened to be relaxing on the patio, and who began to rambunctiously play with the wool, tugging it furiously with his sharp claws, as if it was the most wonderful game. Slowly but surely a slow snore came out of Nancy's mouth. Her head shifted to one slanted angle, dropping over her shoulders, and then she was gone to the world, transported from the patio to a mystical realm you can only ever visit when you're in deep sleep. She didn't know that while she slept and soaked up the sunshine, baby Keegan was gurgling happily in his cot. He was being nursed in the arms of another. She didn't see his face light up like a Christmas tree as he was swept out of his cot and cuddled and nurtured by the stranger, who rocked him gently against her snug, sturdy chest, while he feasted greedily on a teat that delivered for him the warmest, richest milk he'd ever tasted. Nancy's sleep was both tranquil and deep. She didn't know she was in the presence of a stranger, nor did she know that Genevieve, her cat, rather alarmed by their unorthodox visitor, had abandoned the ball of wool that she'd practically wrecked with her sharp claws, so that Nancy's knitting was lying on the ground, having lost all its stitches in a tangled mess that could not be corrected. Nancy continued to sleep unapologetically on the Adirondack chair, as if it was the most comfortable mattress lying beneath her. Her sleep was wonderful, so sweet, her dreams so colourful. The afternoon happily chugged along, like a slow-moving train, making its way to a far-off destination. It was the sound of Nancy's cell phone that rang so abruptly that shook her out of her sleep rather violently, so she jumped up with a start, almost as if she'd just had a very sudden electric shock. She felt bemused, disorientated, and somewhat confused, wondering where on earth she was. She realized she was sitting on the Adirondack chair on the porch, her knitting lying on the floor in a tangled mess. Little Keegan was lying fast asleep in his cot, his eyes shut, his heart beating to a slow, energetic rhythm, so the white onesie he was wearing was going up and down in the chest area. He looked so calm, so serene, so much more so than he normally did, for he was usually sickly, but right now his skin had taken on a rosy glow. She hadn't heard a sound from him during what had seemed like a brief siesta. This was very unusual, for when Keegan woke up, he could scream and scream for hours on end, for no earthly reason at all. But he hadn't woken her up at all. She glanced at the cell phone that kept ringing. She could see it was Melinda's name on the caller ID. She quickly glanced at the time and almost had a heart attack. It was 4:30. She couldn't believe it. What had happened to the whole afternoon? How long had she been asleep for? She almost felt annoyed for being rudely awoken by her daughter, for it was hard to get her bearings. But she hurriedly grabbed the phone and answered it quickly, trying to sound as if she was wide awake and alert, when in truth she was anything but. "Hello, darling. How's your day going?" "Mum, thank God you answered. You took your time answering. Is everything all right?" "Yes, of course it is, love. Everything's fine around here. Keegan and I have been enjoying a little sunshine on the porch. It's a pleasant afternoon, isn't it, dear?" "I wouldn't know anything about that, Mum. I've been indoors all the time, run off my feet all afternoon. You have no idea how chaotic it was returning to the salon after leaving Kirsty Rawlings in charge. She left the place in quite the state, you know. I've had to deal with so many complaints from customers. It's been hell, but thank God she walked out on me, so I didn't have to give her the sack. Would you believe it seems her attention has been diverted to a new fancy man in her life, a boyfriend I rather suspect who she's been seeing. She denies it, of course, but everybody knows differently. She more or less allowed the salon to go to seed. It seems I got back to work in the nick of time. Why is it, Mum, so impossibly hard to delegate responsibilities to other people when they keep letting you down like this?" "Well, it sounds as if you've had one hell of a day, darling, and that's not good on your first day back. You don't need all this stress. You poor thing. It can't have been an easy afternoon for you." "You don't know the half of it, Mum. I'll spare you all the grisly details. I meant to phone you a lot earlier on. But with Kirsty's messes that I had to fix, and all these clients I had to pacify, well, I didn't have the opportunity, did I? I barely have given Keegan a second thought, I'm ashamed to admit. Well, I think that's a good thing, love. The last thing you want to be is worrying about Keegan when you're at work. I assure you he's in very safe hands with his grandmother. Of course he's in safe hands with you, Mum. He's a lucky boy, but I'm a mother, so I worry, don't I? Especially with him being so colicky. I just worry about him being so underweight and always looking so desperately pale. Of course you worry, love. It's a mother's prerogative. I did it when you were little. But it's funny you should talk about him being so pale, because right now he looks anything but. His cheeks are quite rosy this afternoon. I've never seen anything like it before. I think lying in his cot on the patio has done him the world of good. I need to do this more often. I'll see you later. After her call with her daughter, Nancy picked up her grandson and swaddled him gently in her arms. He gurgled happily, and she wondered why he hadn't been howling for food, or why he hadn't cried non-stop, because surely, by now, he must have soiled himself, and possibly needed his nappy changing. He seemed so bright, so contented, and so alert, and she'd never seen him this way before. He wasn't showing any signs of colic, but just appeared completely content. She decided to take him for a nappy change in the nursery, but was astonished to find that although his onesie was in place, it looked as if the press studs at the bottom had been badly disaligned. The most bizarre thing of all was that on his bottom half he didn't appear to be wearing a nappy. I thought I put a nappy on him when I gave him his nappy change, she told herself. But he's not wearing one. Nancy was beginning to second-guess herself. She knew when you changed a nappy you did so instinctively, so she couldn't remember the last time when she changed his nappy. But given she was the only one around little Keegan at the moment, she must have absent-mindedly put on his onesie and forgotten to replace his nappy. But he was clean, and it appeared as if he hadn't soiled himself at all, which in itself was astounding. She didn't know what to make of it all. It had been a long time since Keegan had had any sustenance, so she decided to warm up some breast milk that Melinda had left in the refrigerator for her baby boy. But Keegan showed no interest in eating. He appeared to have no appetite. He was gurgling happily and staring at Nancy with wide, twinkling eyes. He looked so serene, so contented, she couldn't get over it. He looked the epitome of a healthy baby boy. But why wasn't he hungry? Nancy was concerned about Keegan's lack of interest in his mother's warmed-up breast milk. But there was nothing about him that suggested he was remotely sickly. On the contrary, he continued to look as sharp as a button. Nancy decided she wouldn't say anything to her daughter about what had just transpired, for Melinda would be horrified that she'd fallen asleep for so long on the patio while supervising her grandson's needs. And if she had doubts about Nancy's ability to look after baby Keegan, their living arrangements would go pear-shaped. "I'm making such a big deal about this," Nancy reprimanded herself. "All right, I fell asleep, I admit that. Big deal, it happens to people. I forgot to put on Keegan's nappy, but his onesie didn't get soiled, which was miraculous in itself, and he doesn't appear to have any appetite. But that does not matter. It was so good for him to be on the patio. His face is glowing. He's showing no signs of being poorly. There's colour in his cheeks, and I haven't seen that for a long time. It looks as if his colic has gone. He hasn't cried at all. I've got absolutely nothing to worry about." The following morning, Melinda was the first one to get up in the Stratton household. It was early. The dawn hadn't broken yet, but there was a lot that needed to be done. She efficiently pumped some breast milk out for baby Keegan, surprised to find an excess of breast milk remaining in the refrigerator from the previous day, which in itself was decidedly odd, but she didn't think too much about it. Maybe baby Keegan had not been that hungry yesterday. Nancy fed Keegan while she rocked him in her arms, and he chuckled and gurgled happily. He appeared hungry, and suckled her breast appreciatively. She gave him a quick nappy change, and was amazed to see how badly soiled his nappy was, which did indeed suggest he probably had a healthy appetite after all. so it didn't explain why there was an excess of extra breast milk in the refrigerator. The previous night Keegan had slept soundly, and Melinda had enjoyed the first night of being undisturbed, which in itself was miraculous, for that had not happened before. And her mother was right. Keegan's skin had a rosy glow to it, and her baby looked so much more calm and content. And there was no signs of any colic last night, for he hadn't cried at all. She placed him in a yellow onesie and put him back in the cot, twisting the mobile for a while so that the little fish darted above Keegan's head, while playing a pretty nursery rhyme. Little Keegan chuckled with delight, his arms trying to reach for the fish. Melinda discreetly left the nursery to join her mother in the kitchen for a much-needed cup of coffee before embarking on her morning run. Nancy was dressed in a pink dressing gown, her hair flat on one side, her eyes congealed with sleep, as if she hadn't quite woken up yet, and was somewhat disorientated. Nancy glanced at her daughter, noticing that she was kitted out in her jogging gear. "You're going for a jog, are you?" she asked. "What does it look like?" said Nancy with a bright smile. "Don't look so surprised, Mum. I want to get fit, don't I? I need to lose some of this baby weight." "Well, you are enterprising, I'll give you that, love. Going out for some early morning exercise before work. Good on you, that's what I say." "Well, believe it or not, Mum, despite the fact I desperately need to get into shape after having baby Keegan, I also find that exercise de-stresses me before work. It makes the day go by more smoothly, and believe you, I'm going to need that." "Well, go and enjoy your run then. I'll take my coffee into the nursery and watch over Keegan for you." "Oh, Mum, I forgot to mention, it's very important that every afternoon, if the weather is warm, to let Keegan lie on the porch in his cot. You did it yesterday, and you're right. He's looking so much better. He's exhibiting no signs of colic, and there's a glow to his face. I've never seen him so contented, and last night he didn't wake us up once. So I think putting him outdoors is a good thing, because it seems that it's actually made him so much healthier. You could also take him for a walk in the woods once in a while in the stroller. And I think that him having some sunshine, well, I think it's doing him good." "But of course it's doing him good. I'll definitely take him for a walk in a stroller at some point. I will adopt the same routine every afternoon like I did yesterday, so that Keegan gets to enjoy some sunshine on the porch. Now off with you. Go and have that jog, and quit worrying about your boy." Melinda was exceedingly grateful to finally be out of the house. It was early morning, and she hadn't gone running for a long time, so this was a first for her. The sunshine had broken through the clouds, casting its cheerful glaze all over the yard and the woodland oasis that stretched out before her like an unexplored map. It was all so warmly welcoming. Melinda couldn't help thinking very fondly of her late father, how much she missed him, how she wished he was here right now. She was reminded of him as she happily ran down these woodland trails, for this is where he'd walk every morning. She was glad she was not pounding the streets in town with her sneakers beating hard against the tarmac, which is what she'd have been doing if she'd been living at the apartment, and that couldn't have been desperately good on her joints. If the truth be told, she was very glad to be living back at home with her beloved mother, and let's just say her mother's help with Keegan had been invaluable to date. But it was such a dreadful pity her father was no longer alive. He'd have loved to see little Keegan grow up into a young man. And ironically, Keegan bore an uncanny resemblance to her father when he was a boy. At least she knew she could go to work at the salon, knowing that Keegan was safe and well in her mother's charge. And by all accounts, her mother did seem to have a magical touch with little Keegan, for there was no doubt he looked incredibly well. There was a rosiness to his cheeks. He looked as if he'd put on weight, and last night he hadn't even woken them up at all. It was almost miraculous, as if the colic had all but disappeared. But she wouldn't get her hopes up, not yet anyway. As she ran through the woodgrove, her sneakers beat the soft ground beneath them. She felt energized and curiously happy, but her thoughts strayed off to the many issues at the salon, and the dramas that had recently unfolded while she'd been away from work. She felt frustrated that she'd never found anyone capable enough to delegate responsibilities to, for no one cared about her business as passionately as she did, and that was obvious. But then again, wasn't that inevitable to anyone who ran their own business? She had started the business from scratch 6 years earlier, and had worked herself to the bone to make it succeed, so she was still feeling very aggrieved about the mayhem that she had returned to after a short leave of absence. The wood grove was beautiful in the early morning sun. Everything was covered in the silvery glaze of freshly fallen dew that seemed to twinkle in the morning light, and all the spider webs hanging between the tree branches looked like ethereal dream catchers. It really was truly magnificent. Some of the leaves left behind from the previous fall were lying liberally sprinkled across the earthen floor, like bridal confetti all in gold, while rambling shade-loving plants, many of them blossoming with pretty flowers, were bursting through the ground, sprinkling the woodgrove in a cacophony of pastel shades. Melinda tried to compartmentalize the things in her head that needed to be done that day. She needed to put an order in for new towels at the salon. The old ones needed prompt replacing. They weren't as fluffy as they used to be. An image was everything in an up-and-coming salon. She also needed to order more stock for customers to purchase, as she sold a vast range of top-of-the-range products her clients liked to use. She was going to see a new supplier today for nail varnishes, for the salon was introducing a new range of products, including a more sophisticated form of acrylic nails that had just come onto the market. She also needed to have a long talk with Angie about being fastidious about sweeping up clients' hair after a haircut. All of a sudden her thoughts were rudely interrupted by a cough. But where exactly had it come from? She couldn't be sure. She had heard a cough, hadn't she? She was sure she had. Was there someone on their property, she wondered? She stopped for a second and looked around herself rather nervously. "Hello!" she called out into the woods. "Hello! Is anybody there?" Her voice came back to her in an echo. But the woodgrove remained quiet. There was no answer. "Hello! Is anybody there? Hello? Hello? Who coughed? Who made that sound?" The woodgrove remained as composed and as dignified as a ballet dancer. The only movement came from a slight breeze that whispered through the trees, and Melinda was sure she must have imagined the cough. She continued to jog, but couldn't shake off the ominous feeling that someone was watching her. Indeed, it was so palpable, it was almost as if someone had physically touched her on the shoulder. Once again she stopped dead in her tracks and looked around herself, but nothing was there. "What are you like?" she told herself, jogging straight back to the house to get on with her day. She did not see the tall, shadowy figure watching her curiously from behind a tree. She didn't hear the second cough in the woodgrove that may have made her all the more certain that someone was definitely there. Once Melinda had rushed off to work in her usual last-minute panic, the house breathed a huge sigh of relief when all the stress had left the house in what seemed like a whisk of smoke, as there was no doubt the weight of Melinda returning to work had invited a great deal of tension into the Stratton household, rather like an unwelcome guest that you really didn't want hanging around for terribly long. Melinda's mother Nancy worried about Melinda taking her business far too seriously. When she'd returned home after work, on her first day, and especially after her fiasco with Kirsty and some disenchanted clients, she had looked as flustered as a chicken that had been attacked by a fox in its coop. So Nancy had done her level best to calm down her daughter. She had run a hot bath for Melinda, filling it with lovely essential oils such as bergamot and lavender, designed to both bring balance and relaxation to the body. Later that evening, mother and daughter had shared a bottle of wine together and enjoyed a good movie, while Keegan, against all the odds, slept peacefully in the nursery, which had been a first. It would seem after a hectic day at work, finally Nancy had helped her daughter relax a little, but she was well aware that life was never easy for a working mum. It would be a long while before her daughter learned how to juggle motherhood with running her business, but she'd get the hang of it sooner or later. Nancy decided she would do her best to get on with her day, starting off by doing some household chores. Later she'd make a squidgy butter cake in the kitchen, which was Melinda's absolute favourite, and would lightly lift her spirits after a hard day spent at the salon. A squidgy butter cake, with its meringue-like texture and delicious sweetness, would wipe away stress with just one bite. Nancy decided to leave the squidgy cake cooling in its tin underneath a tea towel on the Adirondack table on the porch. She continued on with her day, making sure that whatever she did, she supervised Keegan's every need. But the baby boy barely cried at all morning, even after he'd soiled his nappy, and Nancy was baffled by how serene her grandson had become. If he carried on this way, it would be safe to assume the colic had all but gone. Finally, when Nancy believed the gooey butter cake was cool, she brought the tin in, covered with a tea towel, leaving it on the kitchen counter, where she'd attend to it later. She knew that Melinda had especially requested her mother to bring out little Keegan onto the porch in the afternoon, to enjoy some fresh air and sunshine. Nancy was determined that this time she would not fall asleep. She couldn't let that happen 2 days in a row, for if she carried on this way, she'd feel like an irresponsible grandmother. Nancy changed Keegan's nappy, putting him in a brand new onesie, and then she carried him out onto the porch, where she placed him in the portable cot, which was permanently left on the patio for little Keegan so that he could thoroughly enjoy the pretty views of the natural world, as Melinda believed all babies, no matter what age they were, needed stimulation and a little fresh air and sunshine. After Nancy had settled little Keegan in his cot with a soft blanket, she then sat down on the Adirondack chair, determined not to get too comfortable. She didn't want a repeat of yesterday, as the last thing she wanted to do was to fall asleep yet again. But she had a horrible feeling in her gut that history might be about to repeat itself. "I'm not tired," she kept telling herself firmly, "so there's no reason for me to fall asleep. And even if I do, Keegan will lightly scream the place down when he wants a feed. Not that he's been doing that lately." She was somewhat annoyed that Genevieve had vandalized her knitting the previous day. There was no point in trying to untangle the mess, so she decided to start all over again and cast on some new stitches. "Oh, no, you don't, Genevieve," she chuckled, as she observed Genevieve lying in a pool of sunshine on the wooden deck, her paw happily splayed out, her yellow eyes pinned directly on Nancy's ball of wool, almost as if she was waiting to have another good go at it again. Genevieve was a playful cat by nature, and unfortunately one of the couches in the living room was testimony to this fact, for that once expensive couch that had cost a pretty penny had been shredded to pieces by Genevieve's claws. She had thought it had made the perfect scratching post, but it seemed she had decided that Nancy's ball of wool also made for a very fine toy. "You're not going to touch my knitting today, Genevieve. I'm sorry, but you're not," said Nancy warningly. "I can't trust you with my knitting." Genevieve stretched out her long, sleek, silvery body, rolled over onto her back, exposing her soft, fluffy, white underbelly. She began to purr profusely, as if the reprimand she had received from her owner had put her in a very good mood, for as far as Genevieve was concerned, no matter what tone of voice Nancy used, she always appreciated attention of any kind, as all attention, whether good or bad, was always appreciated. Nancy cast on her stitches and began to knit rather vigorously. She wanted to make a lovely little white woolly jacket and matching hat for little Keegan, which he could wear when the weather got significantly colder, and he was a wee bit bigger, of course. She really was a dab hand with a pair of knitting needles, and when Melinda had been a baby, she had practically made all her cute woolly outfits for her. All of a sudden, Nancy felt a chill running down her spine. It was an airy feeling that overcame her, and then she realized what it was. Something appeared to be watching her. She felt sure of it. She glanced briefly towards the tall line of trees that fringed the woodgrove, and that was when very suddenly she observed a lofty, dark, shadowy figure standing behind one of the trees, looking directly at her through what appeared to be dark, curious eyes. The very large humanoid figure was so obscure, so incredibly vague, that Nancy couldn't make it out. She couldn't understand what she was seeing, but the feeling of being watched by this shadowy being was so tangible, rather like an itch you need to scratch. Nancy wasn't wearing her spectacles for her long-distance vision, so she reached for her glass case that was lying on the Adirondack table and retrieved her glasses, replacing them on her eyes, and looking towards the woods again. At this point, those vital seconds had cost her dearly, for the indistinct figure that she couldn't make out was all but gone, and she wondered if she was possibly losing her mind, or if she'd actually seen anything at all. It might have been a trick of the light, she told herself, returning to her knitting, feeling ever so slightly flustered, for there was another big part of herself that thought she had seen something, but then she couldn't be sure. So her burgeoning doubt won her over, assuring her that nothing had been there at all. Ostensibly her distant sight left a lot to be desired. Sometimes she mistook people for postboxes and bin bags for dogs. She'd get her visual wires badly twisted, which was why Melinda was constantly telling her to wear her glasses, as without them she was as blind as a bat. But Nancy never felt comfortable wearing eyeglasses. She'd even attempted wearing contacts at one stage, but that in itself had also been a catastrophic disaster. So she put up with being blind most of her life. Nancy could feel her eyes growing heavy. She let out a sizable yawn, and was once again overcome with exhaustion. "Not this again! I can't possibly fall asleep again! What is wrong with me? I did this yesterday. I don't intend to do it today. Melinda would not be remotely happy with me. I need to stay awake for Keegan, to be able to attend to his every need." But she couldn't fight against the tsunami of tiredness which was all-consuming, almost as if an anaesthetist had struck his needle into her arm, so that she was involuntarily dropping off to sleep at the count of 3, and there was nothing she could do to fight against its indomitable hold over her. Moments later her head slumped to one side, her mouth dropped open, and she began to lightly snore. The ball of wool and her knitting fell to the ground. It was jerked off her lap. Genevieve, on seeing the ball of wool spinning towards her, was absolutely delighted, and bounced up enthusiastically from her sleeping position to catch it, and ebulliently tore into the ball of wool with her predatory nails, and Nancy's knitting was once again under savage attack. Nancy was comfortably caught up in a deep sleep, lying back comfortably on the Adirondack chair, completely oblivious of her immediate surroundings, so she failed to see the shadowy creature, with the long dark flowing hair the colour of coal, clandestinely approaching the wooden deck. Genevieve, who had run away from the stranger the day before, was more relaxed when the stranger approached again, and nonchalantly continued to play with the ball of wool. Genevieve seemed to realize that this strange, rather unorthodox, monstrous-sized human being, covered in hair, seemed only interested in one thing, and that was watching over baby Keegan. Nancy failed to see the figure lifting up little Keegan in her overlong arms, and staring at him lovingly, as she placed him on her swollen teat, laden with rich milk. Keegan suckled happily, until he'd had his fill. He gurgled with delight, as the stranger played with his little finger on his tiny hand, marvelling in awe at how anything could be this small. Her adoring motherly eyes delighted in how beautiful Keegan was. Keegan chuckled happily, his tiny fingers clutching some of the wispy strands of the stranger's hair. He found nothing odd or out of place about this motherly human being covered in hair that was attending to his every need, and did so with such a passionate devotion, as if it was her life's purpose to be a mother. The stranger was satisfied that the pale baby she'd nursed only days before looked so much better. There was colour in his cheeks. There was a rosy glow to him. His eyes were shining, and she was sure he'd gained weight. The stranger knew the quality of her milk was excellent, and would easily turn this baby's health around. Nancy did not see the disappointment on the stranger's face, as she replaced Keegan back in his cot, covering him with a blanket. The stranger glanced very briefly at Genevieve, who had fallen asleep next to the ball of wool that she had successfully decimated. Genevieve suddenly looked up at the stranger. She stretched out her paw very contentedly and continued to sleep. The day was beautiful, with the late afternoon sun casting such a pleasant warmth over everything. It was a couple of hours later when the tall, lofty stranger had all but disappeared from the porch, and left no memorable imprint of her presence, when Nancy had suddenly woken up. She was thrown rather violently out of her sleep, almost like a seal being tossed up in the air by an orca whale. She felt somewhat disorientated and confused as she bounced out of her groggy state as quickly as she could, but it wasn't easy. The annoying sound of her cell phone had stolen the silence with its shrill, very unpleasant ringtone that really needed to be changed, as it had given her quite the scare. Nancy grabbed her cell to see her daughter's name on the caller ID and sighed warily. It was Melinda. She knew her daughter was calling to check up on the well-being of little Keegan again, so she had to answer the call, or Melinda would likely worry. She couldn't believe she'd fallen asleep again, when she had pacifically told herself very firmly it would never happen again. Did she really have no self-control? What on earth was wrong with her? Was looking after baby Keegan proving to be too exhausting for her in her advancing age? Surely not. "Oh, hello, Melinda. Is that you?" Her voice sounded vague and unattentive, like someone who's woken up from a deep sleep and is trying to sound alert, but not succeeding in fooling anyone. "Hi, Mum. Is everything all right with you?" came Melinda's rather disquieted voice. "You sound awfully woozy, if you don't mind my saying. You haven't been sleeping, have you?" she said almost accusingly. "You know I rely on you, Mum, to watch over Keegan all the time. I can't have you falling asleep on the job, can I?" she teased. "But cat naps are definitely allowed, because you're not superhuman, are you? And it's definitely hard work looking after a baby. Believe me, I know that all too well." "Of course I haven't been sleeping, love. I just had a 5-minute power nap on the porch, that's all, with Keegan at my side, lying very peacefully in his cot," said Nancy. "You gave me a start, but I drifted off only for 5 minutes. That's all it was." "Oh, I don't have a problem with that," said Melinda. "It's not as if you've been asleep for hours, is it? I've not had an opportunity to phone you sooner, I'm afraid. I've been rushed off my feet again. It's mayhem in the salon, and I'm still fixing up so many of Kirsty's messes. If the truth be told, I'm surprised I have a business left at all to run. But thankfully many of my long-suffering clients are very forgiving and understand how difficult it is to actually rely on decent staff." "Well, I'm very pleased to hear that, love," said Nancy, glancing briefly at the time on her cell phone. She was horrified to realize she'd been asleep for 2.5 hours. How was that even possible? Where had the time got to? These days, when she was out on the porch, she seemed to drift off to sleep without any form of self-control. What on earth was wrong with her? She could see Genevieve lying on the wooden deck, in a contented ball, her legs outstretched, with Nancy's knitting at her side, that was now in a tangled mess. No doubt, when Nancy had fallen asleep, that naughty cat had been having fun with her wool. It was so messed up, her knitting could not be revived. Honestly, that cat was the absolute end. At this rate, well, Nancy could kiss goodbye to knitting anything for little Keegan. "So how is Keegan, Mum? I hope he's been good, has he?" "Oh, he's absolutely fine, darling," said Nancy, quickly allowing her eyes to wander over to little Keegan, who appeared to be blissfully sound asleep in his cot. It was most odd he hadn't woken up crying for a feed, but his cheeks were rosy, and he looked extremely content. "Well, I'm so pleased, Mum, he's well. I do miss the two of you, you know, when I'm at work. But I have to get on with things. It's a good job I'm kept so distracted, or I wouldn't be able to stop thinking about the both of you." "Well, it's very good the business keeps you busy, love," said Nancy. "You don't need to worry about a thing. You know that Keegan is safe with me." "Of course he's safe with you, Mum. You mustn't mind me. You know what I'm like. I worry far too much. But I'd never trust anybody with Keegan other than you. I have to say that since you've taken over watching him, his colic has mysteriously vanished, so you're doing something right. You've obviously got the magic touch." "Thanks for the vote of confidence, darling," said Nancy, feeling incredibly uncomfortable for her daughter's praise, of which she believed she was most unworthy. Little did Melinda know that Nancy had fallen asleep on her job twice in a row, and it hadn't just been for a simple cat nap, it had been for a couple of hours or more. Once the phone call had ended, Nancy was now very much wide awake, and absolutely determined to attend to her duties as caregiver for little Keegan. She tried to give Keegan some of her daughter's warmed-up breast milk, but Keegan wasn't having any of it, and didn't appear to show any interest in eating at all, which was somewhat confounding and rather unsettling for Nancy. She changed Keegan's nappy and then wandered off into the kitchen to get a square slice of gooey butter cake that she had baked earlier on, as she suddenly had a craving for something irresistibly sweet. But when she removed the tea towel from the tin, she observed that all the gooey butter cake was missing. There was not even any crumbs left at the bottom of the pan. It was as clean as a whistle, so much so that she could easily wonder if she'd made the cake at all. The whole cake was missing, and in its place was a very interesting-looking fossil of a fern, and it was so beguilingly pretty that Nancy almost forgot about the missing gooey butter cake. "Wow, this is very pretty," she thought, deciding to put it on the mantel in the living room for display, among some of her other collector items. Nancy couldn't fathom what had happened to her gooey butter cake, and why in its place was a fossil of a fern. She remembered thinking she'd seen a tall shadow staring at her from the trees in the grove, but she thought she had imagined it all. But who had taken the gooey butter cake that she had left unattended on the Adirondack table on the porch many hours earlier? It didn't eat itself up, and fossils didn't randomly appear in cake tins, so what was going on? Nancy decided to keep the disappearance of the gooey butter cake to herself, and set about making another one for her daughter's return. Something was going on, and she wasn't sure what it was, but she would not be sharing her concerns with her daughter, lest her daughter should panic. She knew Belinda would abandon her job at the salon in a second if she suspected anything untoward was going on at home. When Melinda did return home that evening, she told her mother about her run-in in the woodgrove earlier on in the morning. "It was so lovely out there. I so enjoyed going for a jog. But I have to admit I got a bit of a start during the jog. It was probably nothing, of course," she said, waving a dismissive hand in front of her. "What do you mean?" Nancy asked her daughter. "Oh, it's nothing, really." "It's not nothing, darling," she said. "You had a start. What happened?" "Well, I don't want to alarm you, Mum, because it really was probably nothing. My mind was probably just playing tricks with me, that's all. I've probably been overthinking things with the business, you know." "Maybe you have, darling. But tell me what happened anyway. I am curious." "Well, when I was going for a jog in the grove, I could swear I heard someone coughing. But when I looked around, no one was there. To tell you the truth, I thought I was losing my mind. Because, as I said, there was no sign of anyone. Everything was still." "Well, it probably was nothing," said Nancy, pretending to agree with her daughter. "You've been so overworked, haven't you, since you've returned to the salon? It's hardly a wonder that you're hearing things that aren't actually there." "You're right, Mum. I'm overthinking things, aren't I?" said Melinda, unable to hide the relief on her face. "It's just I worry about Keegan, don't I? And when I heard the cough, it reminded me of the time there was a vagrant living on our property. And I would hate a stranger to be hanging around our place. I just wouldn't feel safe." Nancy was now secretly beginning to wonder if they had a problem. Was there a vagrant possibly living in their woodgrove? Had that vagrant slipped onto the porch earlier on in the day and eaten up her gooey butter cake, leaving behind a fossil as way of repayment? The thought that there might be some unwelcome stranger hanging around the woodgrove made Nancy feel exceedingly unsettled. She didn't want to worry Melinda. She needed to investigate the problem for herself, to find out the whereabouts of this stranger, who had absolutely no right to be camping out on their property. She'd tell him to leave the premises at once. This wouldn't be the first time that someone had been camping out on their land. The same thing had happened about 10 years earlier, when she discovered a strange man living rough in their woodgrove. As to why he had done this, no one knew. He had built for himself a makeshift shelter out of wood. He also had a hammock hanging between the trees. He would wash his clothes by the stream that ran through the woods. Nancy had only discovered his presence by chance, when she observed some rag-like clothing, full of holes hanging on the tree branches to dry. The man had been in his late 20s, and looked to be a simpleton. His 2 front teeth had been missing, and the rest of his teeth appeared to be rotting, and were yellow in colour. His hair was so messy, he looked like a scarecrow. The man, despite washing his clothes in the stream, had smelt like a skunk. So his rank body odour had got Nancy's attention, and that was how she had discovered him in the first place. When Nancy encountered the man and asked him what he was doing there, his wide brown eyes looked at her like a frightened wild animal that had come face to face with a deadly predator. The young man had simply bolted from the Stratton premises, leaving the little he had in life behind, including his hammock and a few pots and pans that she had found in his makeshift shelter. She had never seen him again, and so had no idea what his story was. These days, of course, Nancy was well aware that there were lots of homeless people living all over the Pacific Northwest, and maybe some loner, like the sorry lost-looking soul she had encountered that day, had decided to camp out on her property by the stream. And whoever he was, he clearly had a very sweet tooth, and wasn't adverse to stealing gooey sweet butter cake from people's porches. Mind you, Nancy knew very well that gooey butter cake was not something that would last very long in any household. It was so delicious and almost impossible to resist. She thought about the tall, lofty, shadowy silhouette she was sure she had seen, standing behind the tree looking at her moments before that she had fallen asleep. She wondered if that was possibly the vagrant that was camping out on their property. Nancy reminded herself that her daughter Melinda had heard someone cough in the woodgrove while she'd taken her morning jog. She decided she would investigate the woods for herself, especially the area around the stream, to see if she could possibly find any signs of human habitation. The following morning she had taken little Keegan for his checkup with Dr. Carter, who had praised Keegan's progress and said he was putting on a healthy amount of weight. And so despite his refusal to sometimes drink his late afternoon milk, it seemed all was well with her grandson, so at least she could relax.
"You must be doing something right, Mrs. Stratton," said Dr. Carter approvingly. "I'm incredibly impressed. There are no words. You seem to have had a breakthrough with Keegan, have you not? He looks like a completely different baby boy to the one that I saw 2 weeks ago. The transformation is nothing short of miraculous. He was very poorly, his complexion pale, his eyes dull, and his general constitution wasn't great. But look at him now. You'll be glad to know his vitals are excellent. He's now reached a healthy body weight. So you're doing something right. How is his colic? It's not giving you any problems, is it? He looks very contented to me. He hasn't cried at all since I've been looking at him."
Nancy paused for a moment and said, "Well, that is true. Keegan hasn't been any bother at all. He appears to have stopped crying, and we've all been able to get some quality sleep. So by all accounts, the colic appears to have gone."
"Well, that's very good news, isn't it?" said Dr. Carter. "But why do I get the feeling that there is a bit more going on here? You seem to be holding back on something. What is it?"
"Well, there is something as it happens."
"What is it?"
"Well, how do I put it, Dr. Carter? Sometimes during the afternoon, when a baby like Keegan should be hungry, he appears to have absolutely no appetite, which personally I find profoundly odd."
"Oh, don't worry about that, Mrs. Stratton. I can assure you when a baby is hungry you will know all about it. And if anything were wrong with your grandson, he wouldn't be putting on a healthy amount of weight, would he? If anything, he's the healthiest I've ever seen him. He's got colour in his cheeks, and his eyes are bright. 2 weeks ago, I would say his health was cause for concern. I didn't want to worry Melinda about it, of course, but I was concerned about seeing him today. But he's turned a corner. The news is very good indeed."
Nancy paused again and said, "Dr. Carter, over the last couple of days in the afternoon, when looking after little Keegan, well, the problem I'm going to talk about is concerning me, actually. I just seem to fall asleep. I try to stay awake looking after him, but sometimes I drift off, you know, for a long while. I'm wondering if there might be something wrong with me. I'm not getting any younger, you know. Melinda's entrusted me to take charge of little Keegan, and I'm worried about napping in the afternoon."
Mr. Carter laughed at Nancy and said, "You're looking after little Keegan, Mrs. Stratton, for Melinda, and as far as I can see, you're doing a fine job. When Melinda brought Keegan to see me 2 weeks back, he wasn't in good shape. He was suffering from colic, and she was very concerned about his health. The good news is, as you were saying, the colic has disappeared. He seems perfectly healthy to me. I suspect it's what is known as a grandmother's magic touch. As for your falling asleep while looking after your grandson, well, that doesn't surprise me at all. It's a big responsibility taking care of a little one, and even the best of us are inclined to nod off. One thing about new mothers I know all too well is most of them are permanently exhausted. Some of them describe themselves as walking around like zombies. I wouldn't worry about your little naps. They're probably good for you, and they're certainly not harming little Keegan. But Dr. Carter, I haven't told Melinda this because she'd probably panic if I were to do so. But I'm afraid I've under-exaggerated to you about how bad my sleeping in the afternoon really is. I made you think I was just having a nap, but it's much more than that, and I've got no control over it at all. I try to fight it off, I really do, but the next thing I know, I'm out like a light. Rather like a person with narcolepsy that can sleep any time, anywhere, at the drop of a hat. I rather suspect I'm becoming like that. Could I have developed narcolepsy, Dr. Carter? You see, I do need to stay awake for baby Keegan, while Melinda is at work in the salon. But I can be out for the count for over a couple of hours. My grandson doesn't even wake me up, which is profoundly odd. He's content all afternoon and doesn't demand anything of me at all. It's not normal for me to be asleep like this, is it? If your grandson is gaining weight, he's healthy and happy, and not constantly crying for a feed, I fail to see what your problem is, Mrs. Stratton. Most people would be happy to get some quality kip, as mothers dream of having some undisturbed sleep. So quit worrying about it, even if it is a lot longer than your average nap. As to why your grandson is content in the afternoon and doesn't wake you up for a nappy change or a feeding, well, all I can say is count yourself as very lucky in that regard. You can have some time to yourself, even if it is enjoying an extended nap. I wouldn't worry about drifting off to sleep in the afternoon if I was you. That is very normal, all over the world, especially in places like Italy. It's perfectly natural for people to have a siesta in the afternoon for a few hours. Our bodies know exactly what they need, and when they demand sleep, they demand it. And I expect your body is being very demanding in its sleep requirements simply because you've taken on extra responsibilities, and one of them is caring for your grandchild. And as I keep telling you, it can take a lot out of you. No wonder you're exhausted, Mrs. Stratton. If you like, I can do some blood work on you. But my guess is your body is just needing extra sleep, simply because you're exhausted. Looking after a baby is very draining, even if you don't realize it. I know when my wife gave birth to our little girl, she was forever taking extended naps during the afternoon. What you're experiencing is perfectly normal, and it is no concern, I can assure you. I suppose you're right, Dr. Carter. What you say makes perfect sense to me. I am overthinking things, aren't I? I'm being overwrought and irrational. Anyway, if Keegan really did need me, I would wake up to attend to his needs at once, because he would cry so loudly he would wake the living dead. Not that he's done that for a long time. So I guess I'm lucky. He's been rather undemanding of late. You're very lucky, Mrs. Stratton. But for your sake, I hope it lasts. Many mothers I know don't get a wink of sleep or a moment's peace. And they walk around permanently tired. If you can get a few hours, Kip, embrace it. That's what I say. I mean, you and your daughter have been to hell for a long time with this colic that has kept you wide awake at night, and now it's gone. That's cause for celebration, is it not? But it also means your body is probably trying to catch up on some much-needed sleep. You're right, Dr. Carter. I mean, we've been kept awake night after night with that colic. So it makes sense that my body is now just demanding all that extra sleep. Thanks for making it all make sense to me. That's what I'm here for, Mrs. Stratton, to reassure my patients that they're doing a great job in raising their grandchildren. The trouble is, Mrs. Stratton, you and your daughter Melinda seem to have been cursed with that worry gene. So let it go, will you, and just relax, and everything else will go swimmingly."
When Nancy returned home from Keegan's checkup with the doctor, she was feeling a lot more happy and reassured. Dr. Carter was extremely impressed with a huge improvement in Keegan's health. He no longer had that insufferable colic and wasn't screaming all the time for attention. So what if she was drifting off to sleep in the afternoon? As Dr. Carter rightly pointed out, her body probably needed the extra sleep. Besides anything else, if Keegan needed her, she'd likely know about it, because he would wake her up with his cries. Yet she did privately ponder to herself how it was possible that Keegan could be gaining weight while eating less. He certainly wasn't getting through all the milk that Melinda supplied. Nancy was reminded of the job she needed to do right now. She was absolutely certain someone must be camping in the woodgrove by the stream on their property. She didn't feel remotely comfortable about a stranger on their premises, even if they were completely harmless. I mean, Melinda had heard a cough when she had gone for a casual jog in the woodgrove, which meant someone could be camping there, and it would explain the disappearance of the gooey butter cake, and the appearance of a strange fossil in the tin, along with the unsettling feeling that Nancy had always been getting when sitting out on the porch, of being watched all the time. "I need to check this out," she thought, "and tell that vagrant, whoever he is, to leave the premises at once, or I'll call the police on him." Nancy put some mace in the pocket of her denim shirt, almost as a precautionary measure, but doubted she would need to use it. But it was best to be prepared for every eventuality. The stranger that might be camping out in the woodgrove, like so many of these sad down-and-outs, probably was harmless enough. Probably one of those lost souls that was down on his luck. Even if she had sympathy for him, she didn't want a stranger she didn't know lurking around, not when she had the safety of little Keegan to consider. She put Keegan into his stroller, that was especially designed for mothers to use while jogging. Melinda had brought the stroller with the idea of getting fit while running with her baby. Nancy was not intimidated by very much, so if indeed a stranger was camping out on her property, she was not afraid to tell them to go. She had promised Melinda that she would take little Keegan for a casual stroll in the woods one day, so that he could enjoy the pretty scenery and warm sunshine on his skin, for you should never underestimate how much babies take in during their first months of life. The weather was so perfect, and Nancy was feeling encouraged about her visit to Dr. Carter. She thought some light exercise would serve her well, and might actually invigorate her enough to help prevent her from falling asleep again in the afternoon. It was so prepossessing in the woodgrove. Nancy hadn't taken a walk in the grove for many years. It was something her late husband Kenneth would regularly do, but Nancy had preferred to go to a yoga class in town twice a week, and that had been for her a satisfactory form of exercise. She realized as she sashayed through the trees down the windy woodland paths that she'd missed out on an awful lot, as walking out in nature is actually something that she was finding uplifting, and sharing the experience with baby Keegan was an absolute privilege. Most people who had a woodgrove on their property would surely take advantage of it, and yet she had ignored this labyrinth of tall, lofty trees for a long time, and felt almost ashamed of her apathy. She continued to walk down the paths, pushing the stroller ahead of her, with baby Keegan's big blue eyes staring up at the trees while he chuckled happily to himself, making some appreciative gurgling sounds that are so typical of babies. Nancy suddenly felt very exhilarated, as if some of the fogginess in her head was lifting, and with each step she took, she became significantly more energized. What a lovely day it was! The sun twinkled mischievously through the forest canopy, and shafts of whispering light stole their way through the branches of the trees, dappling the forest floor in an ethereal glaze that in itself was magnificent. It felt as if Nancy had entered another world. She observed squirrels scurrying up trees and rabbits darting around the woods happily. As she walked down the path, she could hear the gurgling sounds of the stream. There was something so soothing about the sound of water. When Nancy finally reached the stream, she searched for any evidence round and about herself of a possible stranger They could potentially be camping on her premises. She looked for those telltale giveaways, like clothes that might be splayed out on branches, or empty bottles of gin and vodka lying under bushes, but she saw nothing. And she wasn't sure whether to be relieved by this or frustrated, for someone had definitely eaten her gooey butter cake the previous day. For a moment she forgot about her search, as the silvery stream that galloped over the rocks with its foamy white discharge. It was mesmerizing to watch, and was a significant distraction. She lifted Keegan out of his stroller, and pointed to him at the stream. Keegan stared out at the water in fascination, with his large blue eyes that grew wider by the second.
"That is a stream, Keegan. All that water, puddling over the rocks. It's called a stream. Isn't it pretty?"
Nancy sat down for a moment on a flattened rock that overlooked the stream, with a stroller by her side. She placed baby Keegan on her lap, so that together they could enjoy the views over the water, while listening to the chirrups of the birdsong. All of a sudden, on the opposite bank of the stream, Nancy saw an ambiguous, obscure figure, similar to what she'd seen from the distance from the porch the previous day. She wasn't wearing her glasses again, so her vision was distorted. Her eyes narrowed as she tried to focus on the humanoid silhouette, but she couldn't see it very clearly. And then it just vanished before her, and she wondered once again if she was losing her mind. It seemed like only a moment had passed by, but when Nancy looked down on her lap, Keegan was all but gone. For a moment she started to panic, until she jumped up to the stroller and observed he was happily tucked behind a blanket and seemed very contented. He waved his arms around. She felt such a relief to see him in his stroller, safe and well, but she had no memory of placing him in there. Her last memory was of Keegan being on her lap, and the next thing he was in his stroller. How had that happened? The woodgrove seemed to have got a little cooler. The sunshine that trickled through the trees had all but dissipated, and it didn't feel like the early afternoon any more as if it was much later in the day. Nancy pulled out her cell phone and discovered that there were 10 missed calls from her daughter. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. How could that be? How was that even possible? For after she had seen that obscure figure, she was now experiencing the strange phenomenon of missing time. Nancy tried to go over everything in her mind. How could she have lost time? It didn't make any sense. She tried to recall the morning in all its parts. She had returned from Dr. Carter's office at about 11:30. When she'd got back home, she had given Keegan a feed. She'd had a quick sandwich herself, and at 1 o'clock they'd both gone together for a stroll in the woodgrove. So what had happened to the 4 missing hours? She hadn't even fallen asleep, or at least she didn't believe she had, for she never experienced any grogginess that often comes before you just nod off. It would seem 4 hours had vanished. She had no memory of this time, the time between 1 and 5. What on earth was going on with her? Apart from anything else, she hadn't even heard her cell phone ringing for over 10 times in a row. Nancy began to panic, as she imagined how Melinda would react to not being able to get in touch with her, so she quickly dialed Melinda's number back, thinking of a perfect excuse that would be acceptable enough for her daughter, as the last thing she wanted was to tell her daughter about her paradoxical experience of missing time. Melinda would likely think her mother was losing her mind and couldn't be trusted in taking care of baby Keegan. So Nancy knew that despite the bewildering events of missing time that had transpired over the last 4 hours or so, she certainly couldn't share them with her daughter. "Mum! Thank goodness you answered your cell! Where have you been? I've been calling you dozens of times over and you never answered. Is everything all right with Keegan? I've been in such a panic." "But of course, darling, everything's absolutely fine. Keegan is in very good spirits. Nothing is wrong over here, I can assure you of that." "But, Mum, I called you dozens of times. Why didn't you answer?" "Oh, about that, sweetheart. I changed my appointment with Dr. Carter, didn't I, for this afternoon? I left my cell phone in the car, forgot all about it. Took little Keegan for a walk in a stroller around town," she lied. "I'm very sorry if I alarmed you." "Mum, you have no idea what you've just put me through. I've been so worried out of my mind. I hate it when you don't answer my calls.
Well, I'm very sorry, darling. I didn't mean to alarm you. I apologize. So what did Dr. Carter have to say? Well, he thinks I've got the magical touch with baby Keegan, said Nancy. He does? Yes, he's very pleased with Keegan's progress, and very surprised, I have to say. He said the last time he saw Keegan was in rather poor health, and he was very concerned about him, but didn't want to alarm you at the time. And he thought when Keegan came for his appointment this afternoon, that Keegan would, be declining in his health, as he has been, since he was born, really, all the struggles he's been having, so to speak. But so he was absolutely amazed by how brimming with health Keegan is. I told him the colic had all but disappeared, and that Keegan doesn't keep us all awake at night, because he doesn't scream like he used to, and is much more settled. He was really amazed by all this. Well, that's a relief to hear, isn't it? Oh, I'm so pleased that Dr. Carter was saying all this, and that, Keegan is putting on weight. That's the best news ever. Oh, just so you know, Mum, I'm meeting up with a friend later for a light snack, so I'll be home at about 8. I just wanted to check base with you, to make sure everything is all right with Keegan, and to find out how the appointment with Dr. Carter went. I'm so relieved everything's looking good. You mustn't worry so much, my dear. I'm not a machine, you know. I'm human. I can't be glued to my cell phone 24/7. Maybe some people are, but I'm not like that. I may remind you I'm not from your generation, sweetheart, so if I don't answer a call at once, you mustn't panic in the way you do. Usually when you don't hear from someone, it's good news. It's when I call you that you need to worry, because that is when I might be reporting something a little troubling, like Keegan getting a temperature, perhaps. But when I don't contact you or answer your call for some reason, just relax, or you'll give yourself a heart attack. I know what it's like being a mother, but if you worry, you'll make yourself really ill. That's all I'm saying. You're right, Mum. What am I like? I worry so much. Keegan couldn't be in better hands with you. Nancy was shaking as she replaced the cell phone in her denim shirt. She hated lying to her daughter, but the last thing she wanted to do was worry Melinda. But the two questions that plagued her mind incessantly were why did she not hear her cell phone when Melinda had called about 10 times? And what on earth had happened during those 4 hours in the day? Where had they disappeared to? For she had no memory of them at all. When Nancy returned to the house to give Keegan a feeding, he didn't appear remotely interested in the milk that she'd warmed up for him. He wasn't hungry, and his belly seemed full. And weirder still, the nappy he'd previously been wearing had been removed, and his bottom was so clean, with no sign of soiling. So what was going on? Nancy put a fresh nappy on Keegan, and thought about the strange shadowy figure she was sure she'd seen standing by the stream. After she observed that figure, the rest of her day had vanished. She had no memory of it. Was the missing time she'd experienced something to do with the stranger that she thought she'd seen? She couldn't be sure. Don't get yourself in such a state about this, she told herself firmly. Keegan is in the best health, and that's all that matters. If I start fretting when Melinda returns home this evening, she's going to pick up on my angst, and I can't have that. The last thing I need is for my daughter to believe I'm not responsible enough in taking care of my grandson. I'm going to forget this ever happened. Move on with my life. That's the best thing to do. The following morning, Melinda went for her morning jog as usual, but this time she took Keegan in his stroller, wrapping him up warmly, as there was a pronounced chill in the air. She was so delighted with the turnaround in Keegan's health, and it did seem that ever since she had returned to work at the hair and nail salon, his health had improved exponentially. His colic had all but disappeared, and he appeared to be sleeping soundly at night, without constantly waking up the entire household with his loud screams. He was gaining weight, even though he appeared to be only drinking half as much of the milk she pumped out for him. It would seem her mother was doing a great job in taking care of her baby boy, so she really needed to quit worrying so much. Her mother was right about that. She shouldn't panic. If her mother didn't answer her cell,
She knew if anything was wrong with Keegan, she would know about it for sure. So she needed to let go of being this paranoid over her baby boy. But wasn't it a mother's prerogative to be naturally protective over her baby? Keegan seemed so happy in his stroller this morning. He appeared to enjoy the momentum of being wheeled forwards down the path through the trees. Melinda suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. She held on to the stroller so tightly with one hand that her knuckles began to show. She looked nervously around the woodgrove. Someone was watching her. She was sure of it. And that was when she saw her, a tall, lofty, shadowy figure, standing next to a tree, looking directly at her, through a pair of dark eyes. Melinda stared at the figure in disbelief, as it seemed to nod at her politely. There was no way she could be seeing right, no way on God's earth. She involuntarily just closed her eyes, as if she was not trusting what she was physically seeing with her eyes. But when she opened them again, nothing was there. Had she imagined what she'd seen? She began to doubt herself, but she was certain only moments before she had physically seen a female Bigfoot with large bosoms that seemed swollen with milk, almost as if she was breastfeeding. The Bigfoot looked straight at her and had nodded in a friendly way. It was at this point that she had closed her eyes for that brief second, but when she'd opened them again, the Bigfoot had vanished from her sight. When you see something that happens so quickly, in what seems like mere seconds in time, and then it vanishes before your very eyes, it's easy to doubt what you believe you've seen. And that was Melinda's experience. She decided not to tell her mother about the outlandish events, because it was so weird, and it was likely her mother would believe that her daughter had taken on too much at work, and was pushing herself too hard, and as a consequence seeing things that weren't actually there. And maybe that is exactly what had happened. Melinda was so tired of late, not from being kept up and about by her son's colic, as that wasn't happening any more, but by all the worry and stress of returning to work. She had been more than a little flustered with the mess that Kirsty had left behind after she'd taken her maternity leave. She felt overwhelmed by it all. So there was a very distinct possibility that in her fatigue she had imagined what she'd seen. Melinda had never believed that Bigfoots existed in her mind's eye. All these Bigfoot encounters people claimed to have had in North America over the years were, in her opinion, completely fictitious. But now she was wondering whether what she had seen had been real or not. After Melinda had said her goodbyes to her mother and to baby Keegan, she had promptly left for work. And Nancy had taken Keegan off to her sister Marjorie's house, so that her sister would take care over Keegan for her, while she went off to town to do the family grocery shop. Marjorie Stanhope was Nancy Stratton's older sister. She'd never been married before. She had no children or grandchildren, which was something she deeply regretted. So she certainly considered it a privilege to take care of little Keegan for Nancy while she went shopping.
"Keegan looks so healthy, doesn't he?"
she said, looking both delighted and somewhat surprised, as the last time she'd seen Keegan, he had looked small and undernourished, but now he was all smiles. His rosy cheeks had become somewhat chubby. She took Keegan lovingly in her arms and stared down at his adorable face.
"I've never seen him look so well. Look at him. He's the picture of happiness, isn't he? Has the colic really gone?"
she asked, looking almost mystified by this.
"Yes, it's gone," said Nancy. "It's such a relief off Melinda's mind, let me tell you. Dr. Carter was extremely impressed with his progress. He couldn't believe it was the same baby that I was bringing back to him 2 weeks later. He said the turnaround in Keegan's health is phenomenal."
"That's incredible," said Marjorie happily.
"There's nothing worse than dealing with a colicky baby, is there? It's miserable for all concerned, especially when you're kept awake at all the hours God sends."
"It sure is," Nancy admitted, wondering privately whether to share with her sister Marjorie her experience of the missing time she'd had in the woodgrove. Marjorie was still holding Keegan in her arms. She looked up at her sister with a rather bemused expression on her face.
"What's up with you, Nancy? You look as if there's something weighing heavily on your mind. Out with it. You know I'm a great listener, always have been.
She suddenly looked concerned.
Oh dear, it's not what I think, is it? You're not regretting taking on the responsibility of watching over Keegan while Melinda is at work, are you? I worry this might happen. I mean, if it's all too much for you, I think you should be honest and tell your daughter how you feel. She could always organize an au pair or someone to take care of him. I'm sure Melinda would be perfectly understanding about this. I mean, looking after a baby is a big full-time responsibility, and it's not a job for the faint-hearted. And you shouldn't be ashamed if you've taken on more than you can chew.
Nancy sighed.
I wish it was that easy, I really do. It's not what you think, Marjorie, not at all. Granted, you've always been perceptive. But you're right, something is up with me. I'm struggling with a few personal demons, you could say, at the moment. But it hasn't got anything to do with looking after Keegan. That part of things is an absolute privilege as far as I'm concerned, and I've adored every minute of being a grandmother to him. He's such a precious little baby, and without the colic it's been a breeze taking care of him, and I really mean that. Well, that's a relief, isn't it? Said Marjorie. So out with it then, Nancy. What kind of demons are you wrestling with? You know they say a problem shared is a problem halved, and you've always been able to talk to me. I mean, what is a big sister for? If I'm not here to listen to your stories, or what it is that's troubling you, of course.
It was in that moment that Nancy decided to confide in Marjorie and tell her about her strange experience in the woodgrove with the missing time.
I know it sounds bizarre, but it really happened,
she told Marjorie, expecting her sister to think she was going completely loopy. Instead, Marjorie Stanhope looked reflectful.
Well, I've heard of people experiencing missing time before. This is not a first to me.
You have? Asked Nancy, looking hopeful.
What do you think it all means? I'm not sure, said Marjorie, but I definitely don't think you're losing your mind, Nancy, if that makes you feel any better. I believe it really happened to you. I 100% believe you. It's very strange that soon after you saw this obscure shadowy figure, you have no recollection of what happened to 4 hours of time. That's very bizarre. It's such a pity you couldn't see this figure more clearly. But that's because you weren't wearing your long-distance glasses, which I've lectured you about over and over again, have I not? I don't understand why you won't wear them, Nancy. I personally would hate to go around the place half-blind like you obviously do. But against all the odds, you don't seem to mind living like a mole. I'm not blind, Marjorie. I struggle to see things clearly from a distance. It's not much of a hindrance to me. Not really. Well, I beg to disagree on this one. I mean, you didn't get to see what that shadowy figure was, did you? Because you were literally blind. And I think you should wear your glasses. I'm now wondering what it is that you saw. But I do believe unequivocally that the shadowy silhouette is connected to your missing time. You lost about 4 hours, didn't you? And then Belinda tried to contact you, phoning you several times, and you never answered. You never heard her calls. I personally find that absolutely extraordinary.
Well, I'm so glad you don't think I'm going mad, said Nancy, looking heartily relieved.
Some strange things have certainly happened to me. Too many to count, actually. I must admit, the last time I saw that same shadowy figure, I was relaxing on the porch, doing some knitting, and then I was completely consumed with exhaustion, unexplainable exhaustion, and that was it. I was out like a light, and there was no way for me to stop it. So you've seen the shadowy thing before?
Asked Marjorie, looking somewhat stumped.
Well, why didn't you say? Well, there really is not much to say, Marjorie, other than I have felt watched for a long time, every time I'm out there on the porch, so to speak. And that was when I looked towards the woodgrove, and that's when I observed the obscure figure. It seemed to stand on the edge of the woods, next to a tree or two, just looking at me. Then moments after I saw this figure, I just drifted off to sleep. And then the same thing happened when I was in the woods, sitting by the stream, and I saw the figure again. And then I lost my awareness of my immediate surroundings and realized that 4 hours of time had just simply vanished. Well, this must mean the figure you saw has some kind of power over you. I mean, when you saw him in the woods, you have no memory of what happened next, but realized you were missing 4 hours of time, and that Keegan had been placed in his stroller. So tell me more about these extraordinary incidents, when you just fall asleep after you see this thing, almost as if you go into some kind of trance. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Nancy told Marjorie about the strange idiosyncratic things that had happened to her, and Marjorie listened to her story attentively, with wide eyes. She appeared somewhat bewildered by Nancy's bizarre confessions.
Well, as I was saying, every time you see the strange silhouette, you zone out for a while, don't you? You lose all track of time. It's bizarre, it really is. And as I keep saying, it's got something to do with the shadowy figure. It's obviously connected in some way, because you zone out and lose all sense of time, don't you? Well, you haven't heard the half of it, Marjorie. The other day I made a gooey butter cake for Melinda, so when she returned home she'd have a sweet treat. She adores gooey butter cake. It's her absolute favourite, always has been. So I made the cake, covered the tin with a cloth, and let it outside to cool on the porch, so to speak. And then I brought it straight back in. And when I inspected the tin later, all the cake was missing, and in its place was a fossil with a fern on it.
Marjorie chuckled.
Come on, sis. Level with me on this one. You ate the gooey butter cake, did you not? You felt decidedly guilty about it, so you wiped it clean from your mind. You're forgiven for that. We all know what gooey butter cake is like. If you have it around the house, it doesn't last 2 minutes. Believe me, there are times in my life I refuse to remember what I've eaten, in the way of naughty stuff, so to speak, because I would be incessantly plagued by guilt, and, of course, a weak sense of self-control.
Nancy felt decidedly annoyed with Marjorie for assuming she'd eaten an entire tin of gooey butter cake.
All right, Marjorie, supposing I did eat all the cake, which I assure you I did not. Explain to me, will you, where the fossil of the fern came from? It was lying in the tin, almost as if someone was gifting me for the cake, paying me back in kind, so to speak, with a fossil. The fossil is beautiful. I've put it on the mantel with my other prized possessions because I really, really like it. I would have actually swapped the gooey butter cake for the fossil if given the chance, but I wasn't given the option. Someone ate the gooey butter cake. I know they did. And hand on heart, it wasn't me. Even though it is a guilty pleasure of mine, I will admit that.
Marjorie was flummoxed.
You're right. The fossil you found, well, it doesn't make any sense. So if someone did eat the gooey butter cake, as you claim, well, it means someone's on your property, doesn't it? As gooey butter cake doesn't eat itself up. That's my point exactly, Marjorie. So what do you think is going on? The reason I went for a stroll in the woodgrove in the first place with little Keegan in the stroller was to look for any signs of a vagrant living on the property. This wouldn't be the first time it's happened. If you can remember, it happened once before. Yes, I remember, said Marjorie, nodding soberly. You told me all about the incident. Did you find any signs of someone living on the grove? No, I did not. I was sitting by the stream with Keegan on my lap, after I had looked for any signs of a vagrant, and that was when I saw that blurry humanoid silhouette. And then, without even falling asleep, 4 hours just disappeared, and Keegan was no longer on my lap. But he had been placed in the stroller with his blanket around him. I did not put him there, so who did? Furthermore, I noticed his belly was swollen, like it becomes swollen once he's enjoyed a good feeding. His nappy had also been removed, from underneath his onesie. It was nowhere to be seen. And I did not remove it. But he looked like his bum had been cleaned up. There was no soiling. His bottom was perfectly clean. Now try and explain that to me. If that's not outlandish enough for you, just so you know, I took Keegan back home. I tried to give him a feed once again, but he wasn't interested in his mother's milk. He's never been more healthy, is putting on a respectable amount of weight, and yet he's not eating like he used to eat when he was undernourished. Try and explain this to me. Well, I can't explain it to you, Nancy. It's very bizarre, I will admit that. Well, it's only since these strange events have been happening to me, Marjorie, with the so-called missing time, and my involuntarily falling asleep, that Keegan appears to be sleeping unusually well. Putting on a mystical amount of weight, he's happy and healthy. Before that, the colic was a major problem, but after Melinda returned to work, everything got so much better. Dr. Carter thinks I've got the magic touch as a grandmother, but something is going on here that defies rational explanation. Keegan used to be undernourished and very sickly, and now he appears to be thriving. I just don't know what on earth is going on. Well, I can't say I understand what is going on either, sis. All I can say is it sounds very mysterious to me, and I suspect you need answers. Of course I need answers, Marjorie. I was hoping your insight might be able to help me. I'd like to believe that I'm not going stark raving mad. You're not going mad, Nancy, said Marjorie, looking for a moment as if she was locked up in thought. Do you by any chance have any of Kenneth's trail cameras on the property? Well, I do have one, as it happens, Nancy admitted. Well, why don't you hang it up, so it overlooks the porch? So, if you do happen to fall asleep, maybe you can see what's going on, when you're out for the count, so to speak. Marjorie, you're brilliant. Why didn't I think of that myself? I'll definitely give that a shot. It's a fabulous idea. I'm not sure if it'll work for you, Nancy. But let's just say trail cameras take pictures when they detect movement. So I hope that it will pick up something for you. My suggestion is that you wear your long-distance glasses, so if you're on the porch and you happen to see the shadowy figure again, you might get a better look at whatever it is that you think might be watching you. I hope to God, for your sake, it's not some kind of alien from outer space. There's so many reports of missing time connected with alien encounters, aren't there? You think an alien might be on my property? Asked Nancy, looking somewhat bewildered. An alien that happens to like gooey butter cake? I didn't think you believed in stuff like that, Marjorie. You do surprise me. Oh, I don't believe in aliens. I really don't, Marjorie admitted. But every time you hear about so-called alien abductions, you hear of missing time, don't you? And that is what I'm getting at here. Well, I hope you're not right. I don't fancy the idea of having an alien on my property, said Nancy. Imagine if I was being taken into a spacecraft during this missing time and being prodded and poked by some kind of bizarre creature from out of space. The thought is just too terrifying for words. For goodness sake, Nancy, don't get unduly alarmed. My suggestion is you put up that trail camera, and then if you do happen to drift off while you're on the porch watching over little Keegan, you can review the shots afterwards and see if anything untoward is actually going on. It might put your mind at rest. It certainly won't put my mind at rest, Marjorie, if nothing is going on, so to speak. What if I do see that shadowy figure? Then I fall asleep, but nothing happens. Does that mean I'm as mad as a March hare? You hear of psychotic people seeing spiders climbing walls. They see things that aren't real. What if that is happening to me? What if I'm physically seeing things that aren't actually there? What if that shadowy figure is all in my imagination? What if I was the one that ate the gooey butter cake? What if I am losing my mind? Oh, goodness gracious, listen to yourself, Nancy. You really are overwrought. You insisted you didn't eat that gooey butter cake. And you do sense that something is going on, and I believe you. I wouldn't worry if you don't detect anything on the trail camera. You just have been taking care of Keegan, haven't you? And it's a full-time job. It's very stressful. Maybe you've become absent-minded, very sleepy. After all, it's a big responsibility taking care of a little one, is it not? Well, all I can say, I hope, Marjorie, that I do find something, because if I don't, I really will think I'm losing my mind. It was later that afternoon that Nancy decided that she would install one of her late husband's trail cameras on the porch, so that she could see if anything untoward did happen when she drifted off to sleep while watching over her grandson, so that if anything did happen, she might catch it on camera. The afternoon was bright, and prisms of sunlight happily bounced across the porch, almost as if it was beckoning Nancy to spend some quality time out of doors, lapping up the sun like a contented cat. Nancy placed Keegan in his portable cot. He looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes, gurgling happily. These days he was so serene, so easy to take care of. Such a pleasure. Genevieve was lying on the patio sunning herself in a patch of sunshine that she had greedily grabbed for herself. Once again her bright yellow eyes fixed steadily on the tapestry bag that Nancy was opening as she sat back on the Adirondack chair. Nancy pulled out a fresh new ball of wool to start her knitting project all over again, as her previous attempts to knit had failed miserably. The wool had been torn to shreds by Genevieve. Genevieve was lying on the patio, sunning herself in a patch of sunshine that she'd greedily snatched for herself. Once again her bright yellow curious eyes fixed on the tapestry bag that Nancy was beginning to open as she sat back on the Adirondack chair. She pulled out the fresh new ball of wool to start her knitting project all over again, for her previous attempts to knit had failed miserably, for the wool had been torn to shreds by her cat. Genevieve blinked and looked very content lying across the wooden floor, but her eyes remained steadily fixed on the ball of wool as Nancy cast on some new stitches. She chuckled as she eyed her mischievous cat. "I'm sorry, Genevieve. Not this time. I'm not going to fall asleep," she told the cat. "You're not going to get those nasty sharp talons of yours into my knitting. You hear me?" Genevieve rolled over on her back happily, allowing the white feathery fur of her stomach to embrace the sunshine like a warm hug. Genevieve always exposed her belly when she was contented. She thoroughly enjoyed spending time on the porch with Nancy and baby Keegan. Nancy put on her long-distance glasses so that she would prepare herself in case she was to see the strange silhouette staring at her from the trees. This time she might be able to focus on what this thing she was seeing actually was. 25 minutes went by, and the afternoon seemed to chug away happily like a steam train, ambling through the countryside at a leisurely pace. Nancy was pleased that this time she wasn't falling asleep. At one point she happened to glance over her knitting and cast her gaze towards the lofty labyrinth of trees that formed the woodgrove, and that was when she saw her. No, it couldn't be. It just could not be. Nancy was rattled, so much so that her ball of wool rolled off her lap and onto the floor, and Genevieve, who thought the ball of wool had come out to play with her again, bounced up in sheer delight and began attacking it frenziedly. Nancy was caught up in the moment. She didn't even notice Genevieve and the ball of wool. She stared at the woodgrove in bemusement, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing was real. But the long-distance glasses she was wearing did not lie. She could not remain in denial for a moment longer. She was seeing a Bigfoot, a female Bigfoot, standing by the trees looking at her. She was tall and lofty, robust in size and stature. Before Nancy could react in any way, she found her eyes growing extremely heavy again. She couldn't fight against the exhaustion that had overtaken her, and she drifted off into sleep.
While Nancy slept, she had a lucid dream where the details were colourfully vivid, so much so that later she was to believe that the dream was actually real. In the dream, Nancy observed a female Bigfoot gliding towards the porch with a nimble grace, trotting up the steps and moving towards the cot where Keegan lay fast asleep. Nancy could observe Genevieve on the floor, tearing her wool apart and seemingly ignoring the tall, lofty stranger. The female Bigfoot leant over the cot, and little Keegan appeared to be gurgling in delight. She then lifted up a delighted Keegan in her overlong arms and squatted on the floor with him, offering him a teat from one of her oversized breasts. Keegan suckled happily, and the Bigfoot rocked the baby very gently in her arms. She then replaced Keegan back in the cot and removed a dirty diaper from his bottom, wiping Keegan clean with the back of the diaper. She then placed the dirty diaper on the Adirondack chair. The Bigfoot played with little Keegan for a while, talking to him tenderly in a strange language. Gitanda, kilatika, sokolosi, manikasi, washinata. Then she finally got up to leave, but as she did so, she stood in front of Nancy, whose head was sloped to one side, as she was so deep in sleep. It was like she was seeing herself outside of her own body in the sleep-like state, which was extremely unusual and very weird. What happened next in the dream was so profound for Nancy, for she heard the female Bigfoot speaking to her. "My work is done. I'm going away. The baby is better now. I have a baby of my own to look after, but this baby was so sick I had to help. I couldn't sit by idly and not do anything to help. I hope I haven't been too much of an intrusion. He should be fine now. Take good care of him. He's a very special little boy." And with that she turned around and glided away. It was a while later that Nancy woke up with a start. Her cell phone was ringing. She glanced down at the caller ID, expecting it to be her daughter on the cell, but to her surprise it was her sister Marjorie. "Hello, sis." "Oh, it's you," said Nancy. "You've just woken me up. I hope you realise that, sis. So you did fall asleep again, like all the other times in the afternoon. Did you see the shadowy figure again?" she asked excitedly. "Did you see what it was? It wasn't an alien, was it, by any chance?" For a moment Nancy said nothing, and Marjorie thought they had lost a signal. "Nancy? Nancy, are you there? Are you there?" "Yes, I'm here. You woke me up. I'm just trying to get my bearings. So did you see the shadowy figure or not? It's clear you fell asleep. You do sound rather groggy, I have to say." "I did see the shadowy figure," Nancy admitted. "And what was it? It wasn't an alien, was it? Not one of those mantis beings, perhaps?" "It wasn't an alien, and no, it wasn't a mantis being from outer space. Oh, I've been reading all about them, ever since you told me about this missing time. And I'm beginning to believe that aliens might very well be real. And apparently these mantis beings, well, they really are something, you know." "No, I never saw a mantis being. I keep telling you I didn't." "Well, what did you see?" "Oh, you saw the vagrant, did you? That's been dossing out on your property?" asked Marjorie, sounding somewhat disappointed. "No, I didn't see that, as it happens. I saw a female Bigfoot." "You what?" asked Marjorie, sounded so taken aback, for this was the last thing she was expecting to hear. "You heard me?" "Yes, I did hear you, Nancy. You say you saw a Bigfoot. Did you really? Or are you winding me up?" "I'm not winding you up. I saw a Bigfoot. And after I saw that Bigfoot, the same thing happened to me. So I know the Bigfoot was the shadowy figure that I'd been seeing all along. For soon after I saw the Bigfoot, I drifted off to sleep and woke up again. But I had a very lucid dream. The Bigfoot was in my dream. She was nursing Keegan with her breasts that were full of milk, and then after she fed him, she spoke to me, in my dream, that is."
Nancy, you're sounding completely over the top talking like this. Do you realize how crazy you sound? Now I am beginning to worry that you may be going mad. There is no way a female Bigfoot has been nursing Keegan and causing you to fall asleep. I don't even know if Bigfoots are real, and none of this makes any sense to me at all. Well, I promise you, she was real, and what I'm telling you is true, said Nancy. My dream was vivid, and I've got a feeling it might have actually been real. Or I was meant to remember it, because she spoke to me, the female Bigfoot, in my dream. I remember her words, word for word. She spoke to you in your dream? I mean, how is that possible? I don't know how it's possible, Marjorie, but it happened. Are you trying to say you don't believe what I'm telling you? It's not that I don't believe you, Nancy, but you've got to admit it. This is very weird. So tell me, what did the Bigfoot actually say to you? She told me she knew Keegan had been a sickly baby. She said she was a nursing mother with a baby of her own. She wanted to help Keegan get better. So she nursed him with her milk. She said her work was now done and he was a better baby, and she apologized for being so intrusive. Well, I don't know what to say, Nancy, but I have to admit, it does make all the missing pieces suddenly fit together. Let's face it, Keegan has suffered from dreadful colic, and he's been a very sickly baby. Very ill. And then he stops eating but appears to gain weight. And now he's robustly healthy, with colour in his cheeks and a happy disposition. Maybe the Bigfoot's milk made him better. Probably because living out in the wild like she does, she has invaluable antibodies that maybe we humans don't have. This is completely insane. You better check the trail camera to see if you've caught her on it, perhaps. Oh, I'd forgotten about the trail camera. I'll definitely do that. To cut a long story short, Nancy was to find that the trail camera had been repositioned, and although she saw a flash of something in the camera, when it was being turned around, the figure appeared so obscure you couldn't make anything out. For years Nancy never told her daughter Melinda about the strange events that had happened to her when she'd first started taking care of baby Keegan, until one day they compared notes, and Melinda admitted that she had seen a Bigfoot in the woods on a morning jog, but after the encounter that had felt so surreal, she was convinced her eyes had deceived her. Melinda remained living with her mother. She married a man called Luton, who fitted in with their living arrangements superbly. She went on to have 2 more baby boys with Luton, but luckily the 2 boys that she had with him never had colic, and the large house was filled with laughter and fun. Keegan grew up to be a strong, healthy young man. He was never inclined to get infections that other children were predisposed to, for he had an extraordinary immune system on him. Nancy believes this was because he was nursed by a female Bigfoot. She never saw the Bigfoot again, nor did she fall asleep again on the porch while watching over little Keegan, or lose any more missing time that she couldn't account for. She believes to this very day that Keegan would have continued to be a very sickly baby, had it not been for the kind intervention of a female Bigfoot that ensured that her son's immune system became absolutely robust. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.